Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It wasn't the screams that first drew her attention. Not the banging, not the lights flickering behind the boarded windows. It was the way the air seemed wrong, too still on some nights, too sharp on others, cold even in summer. Emma wouldn't have noticed the old house on Ashmere Lane at all if it hadn't started watching her back. They said it had been empty since 1987, when every member of the Delaney family vanished on the same night, leaving dinner half-eaten and the TV still playing static. Police reports were thin, neighbors silent, and files, if they ever existed, vanished from city archives. The only thing that survived were stories. Not the kind people tell around campfires to scare kids. These were whispered warnings between adults in grocery store lines. Prayers muttered when headlights caught the house's edge. The kind of stories that rot in your head until one day you wonder if you imagine them all. Emma thought she was done with bad memories. She'd left behind a career that hollowed her out, a marriage that dried up from silence, and a city that never quite let her breathe. So when she found the quaint cottage at the far end of town, she thought she'd found peace. It wasn't until the third night that the dreams started. In them, Emma stood in a hallway, longer than it should be, lined with doors that didn't match. Some were cracked open, leaking light that pulsed in slow, measured rhythm, like a heartbeat. One door always called to her. It had no handle. It whispered. She woke every time just before touching it. The local kids called the Delaney house Hollow Place. A stupid nickname, she thought at first, until she drove past it during a fog, thick morning and saw the house looking back at her. That's the only way she could describe it. The house looked. Something behind the glass, black and wet and still, noticed her. By the fifth dream, she stopped sleeping altogether. That's when she met Sam. A quiet man with too many rings on his fingers and a beard that looked like it had stories to tell. He worked at the bookstore she wandered into while searching for anything to dull the creeping sense of dread. "You seen it too," he said before she could even ask where the true crime section was. She froze. "What?" He tapped the counter. "The house. End of Ashmere. You've been noticed." Emma laughed it off, weakly. "I don't believe in haunted houses." "That's good," he replied without smiling. "Because it doesn't believe in ghosts either." He handed her a book without being asked. "Don't read it at night," he said. She didn't listen. It was a journal. The name inside read Madeline Delaney. Dates ran from 1985 to 1987. The entries were scattered, increasingly erratic. The early ones talked about family dinners and gardening. Then came the scratches on the walls. The way her baby brother started humming songs that didn't exist. The way reflections in mirrors began moving on their own. "I saw myself today," Madeline wrote on June 2nd. But she wasn't me. She smiled too wide. Emma stopped reading then. Something moved in the hallway. She was alone. Or so she thought. That night, the dreams returned. But not like before. This time, she made it to the door. This time, she touched it. It didn't open. It breathed. Something on the other side exhaled, warm and wet through the wood, like something was waiting patiently. She woke choking on the smell of earth and mold, as though something had clawed itself up from the soil and climbed into her bed. She threw the book into the fireplace. The flames turned blue. By morning, the book was back on her coffee table. Open to the page she'd stopped on. June 2nd. She drove to Sam's bookstore to return it, but the place was closed. Not just for the day, abandoned. Dust lined the inside of the windows. "AFOR last" sign hung crooked on the door. The strangest part, she'd spoken to him only 12 hours earlier. The neighbors gave her blank stares when she asked about him. One older woman, a wrinkled face wrapped in scarves, just shook her head and muttered, "He never lasts long." That was the first time Emma felt the house smiling. By the 10th night, she stopped questioning it. She started writing in her own journal. "It's closer," she wrote. "The door's closer in the dream. I don't walk to it anymore. It finds me." She tried leaving town, packed a bag, drove past the last gas station and never looked back. She woke up in her bed, her bag still packed, car untouched. Only the gas gauge was different. It now read empty. And in her mirror, for just a moment, she saw herself sleeping peacefully. But she was wide awake. That night, the house creaked, not from wind or settling beams, but as though it had taken a step, a deliberate movement. One long groan of wood stretching inward. Emma watched from her window. Her street was silent, the kind of silence that screamed. The house stood still, but she knew it was no longer waiting. It was deciding. That's when she remembered something from the journal. An entry from July 9th. The house doesn't move. It doesn't need to. It pulls. It bends. Emma looked again at her window and realized. She could see the Delaney house clearly now. But her home had been built at the opposite end of the street. She measured the distance the next morning. Her steps came shorter, the air heavier, the road cracked in new places. She could now read the rusted numbers on the mailbox out front of the Delaney house, 91. The dream that night wasn't a dream. The hallway was her hallway. The doors were hers, except one wasn't. The handleless door stood right between her bathroom and bedroom. It pulsed like a vein, waiting. This time, it opened by itself. Inside was not a room. It was outside. Dirt stretched in all directions, headstones scattered like teeth, and something was digging. A small shape, fast hands. A child. Madeline. Emma whispered. The girl turned. It was her face. Not similar. Identical. Madeline's eyes were hollow, skin pale, hair matted. Her smile was too wide. She spoke, but the voice didn't come from her mouth. It came from the walls, from beneath the dirt. "You're the first one it chose," said the voice, "and the last." Emma woke screaming, buried in soil. Real soil. Her sheets were filled with dirt. Her skin under her nails was raw, and on her wall, something had written HE open-ended IT. She went to the police. They laughed at her, joked about stress. One offered to have someone check in. That officer never came. Emma dug into old records, obsessively. The Delaney family wasn't the first, not even the 10th. Every 30 years, someone on Ashmere vanished. Families, renters. One boy in 1926 walked into the house and never came back out. His mother said she could still hear him knocking from beneath their floorboards. She found blueprints of the original town layout. Her house didn't exist in the old maps, but the Delaney house had once stood where hers was now. The twist came when she checked the foundation stones in her basement. Etched into one was a symbol she'd seen in the dream. 3 circles linked by a jagged line. Underneath it, MD. 1987. The final entry in Madeline's journal simply said, "I let it in. I'm sorry." The next night, Emma slept with every light on. It didn't help. She didn't dream. She moved. When she opened her eyes, she was standing at the Delaney house's front door, hand raised to knock. The door was already open, and from inside, something whispered with her voice. "Come home." Emma didn't remember walking back home. Her last clear memory was standing before the Delaney house, hand trembling in the stale night air, staring at a door that had already invited her in. But now she was back in her kitchen, mug half, filled with cold coffee, lights still on from the night before. The dull hum of the refrigerator sounding louder than usual. The strange part wasn't the blackout itself. People lose time in trauma. She knew that, but how her feet were still dirty. Not from her own yard, but that rich, iron-smelling earth that seemed to follow her since the first dream. The same dirt that didn't belong to any soil she'd ever seen. It was darker, wetter, and it clung to her skin like it had been waiting a long time to be touched. She tried to tell herself this was all just the stress, isolation, maybe mold in the walls. But as she leaned against the sink, she saw something reflected in the kitchen window. At first it looked like the silhouette of a man standing behind her. Tall, slouched, arms too long. But when she spun around, the room was empty. The window, however, now had something scrawled in the condensation. 3 simple words. Don't lock it. She stared for minutes, heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. The window began to fog again, slowly erasing the message. By the time she blinked, it was gone. That day, she didn't leave the house. Couldn't. The roads looked wrong, not in a dramatic way. Nothing overt. But the angles felt slightly off, the turns sharper than before, the sidewalk stretching in ways that played tricks on her eyes. When she checked the distance from her porch to the mailbox, she counted 27 steps. When she counted again, 42. She tried a third time, this time backward, and ended up face down in the grass, her nose bleeding and her hands trembling violently. And her mailbox. It now said 91. Just like the Delaney house. Emma stayed inside. She turned on the TV to drown out the noise in her head, but every channel played static, except one. A black and white feed showed a long hallway. The camera was low, tilted like it had fallen sideways. The hallway pulsed gently with flickering light, each bulb swinging faintly as though stirred by invisible breath. The door at the end had no handle. She watched for almost 2 hours before realizing something behind the door was watching her back. She unplugged the TV. That evening, just before dusk, her doorbell rang. It hadn't rung since she moved in. Emma stared at the door, stomach curdling with dread. Whoever, or whatever, was there didn't knock, didn't speak, just waited. She approached slowly, one cautious step at a time. Through the peephole, she saw nothing, but the bell rang again, 3 times. She opened it without meaning to, and found a child on her porch, barefoot, pale, hair hanging in thick clumps over her face. No expression, no movement. Just 2 wide, milk-colored eyes staring up. Emma couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. The child finally raised a hand and held out something wrapped in a cloth. It was Madeline's journal. The same one she burned. The same one she'd watched turn to ash. But this time the cover wasn't leather. It was skin, stitch-marked and damp. The girl whispered, "You dropped this," then turned and walked away, straight down her steps, into the middle of the road, and vanished. Not disappeared, vanished. Like a breath exhaled into the wind. Emma didn't touch the book. She left it outside, bolted her door, pushed a chair against it for good measure. But by morning, it was on her kitchen table, next to the half-empty mug of coffee she hadn't touched in days. The mug was warm, so was the chair, and her front door wide open. Pages flipped themselves open as she stared, finally stopping on an entry she didn't remember from before. August 3rd, 1987. The house doesn't move, it swells. It waits until it can't hold itself in anymore. Then it finds the next one to carry the weight. I think I was the last child to see it with both eyes and not scream. That's how it chooses. Not who's strong, who won't run. Emma looked away. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine, like pressure building behind her skull. She checked the windows. All locked. Yet a draft moved through the house like it was breathing, like lungs expanding behind drywall. And in the silence between gusts, she heard a voice, hers, singing, from the basement. Emma had never sung in that basement. Hell, she hadn't even opened the door since she moved in. She crept down. Step by creaking step, flashlight clutched in shaking hands. Each stair groaned under her weight, and with every inch she descended, the song grew clearer. A lullaby, familiar but twisted, off-key, like a child singing underwater. It came from behind the old water heater. She found the wall wet. Behind the heater, bricks had begun to crumble. The plaster sagged inward, like something had been pressing from the other side. In the center, faint but visible, was the same symbol from the foundation stone. 3 circles linked by a jagged line. She pressed her hand to it. The wall exhaled. Her flashlight died. When it flickered back on, just for a heartbeat, she saw what lay on the other side. A face, pressed against the bricks from within. Eyes like black oil, mouth stitched shut. Then nothing. She stumbled back up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind her, bolting it, ducked, taping the edges. Anything to keep the dark from leaking out. She didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. Because this time, the dream didn't wait for her to fall asleep. It crept in through her walls. Emma blinked and found herself in a room she'd never seen before. White-tiled, old sinks lining one wall, all rusted and dry. The air tasted of bleach and old copper. She turned and saw her own reflection in a cracked mirror. Except this Emma was smiling. Slowly, the smile bled across her cheeks, splitting her skin. Something writhed beneath her features, as though she were wearing herself like a mask. Behind her, a voice said, "You're almost ready." She turned. Sam stood there, or something wearing Sam. His eyes were gone, just pits, but his mouth smiled, and kept smiling until it split ear to ear, exposing nothing but gums and blackened teeth. "You've done well," it said with Sam's voice. "You held the dreams longer than the rest. You made it to the door." Emma tried to scream, but no sound came out. Sam, or the thing that was once Sam, held out his hand. "It wants to remember. It needs your voice." She bolted upright in her bed, breath caught in her throat. But she didn't wake alone. Something shifted beside her. She turned slowly. A child lay under her covers, still, pale, eyes wide open, staring directly at the ceiling. It was her, not Madeline. Her, and as the lights flickered overhead, the other Emma whispered in perfect sync with her own voice, "Don't lock it. You're already inside." Emma didn't move. Couldn't. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat as she stared at herself lying next to her in bed, utterly still but wide awake, eyes never blinking. The silence in the room wasn't just silence. It was a silence that seemed to expand, pressing into her ears until the pressure made her vision flicker at the edges. She wanted to scream. She needed to run. But her body refused. And the other Emma, still, pale, impossibly calm, just kept staring at the ceiling, mouthing something she couldn't hear. She leaned in closer, against her better judgment, drawn in by a curiosity that felt like it wasn't hers at all. The lips of the other Emma moved slowly, forming words with breath that made no sound. "It's planting us." Emma jolted backward. That was all it took. The spell broke. She stumbled out of bed, hitting the floor hard, her elbow cracking against the wooden boards. When she looked back up, the other Emma was gone. The bed was made, smooth and untouched. The light outside her window had changed, not dimmed, not brightened, changed. As if the sun itself had been replaced with something else. Something watching. She didn't sleep again. Instead, she sat on the couch with every light in the house on, journal in her lap, pen shaking in her fingers. She didn't write, just stared at the paper and waited for something to move. It did. Not inside the house, outside. She saw it through the window just after midnight. A figure in her yard, standing near the oak tree that split her fence in two. It didn't move. It didn't even seem alive. But it was there, as real as the wind that never blew. She watched it for 30 straight minutes. And then, without walking, it was suddenly closer, right under the porch light. Still not moving, still staring. She closed the curtains and whispered to herself over and over that she was imagining things. By morning, she found footprints in the dirt below the window. Bare, small, they led up to her bedroom wall and stopped. Not her window, her wall. That day, she dug. Right under her porch, where the dirt seemed darkest. She didn't know what she was looking for. Bones, maybe. Some sort of proof that she wasn't losing her mind. What she found was worse. Fabric, torn and buried just beneath the surface. A child's dress. Old, faded, and still damp. She dug deeper and unearthed more cloth. Then a shoe. Then something softer. Skin. Emma fell back, covered in sweat and dirt. Her hands shook so hard she couldn't hold the shovel. She grabbed her phone and called the police. Again. This time, they actually came. But when she showed them the hole under her porch, it was empty. No dress, no shoe, no skin. Just dry, undisturbed earth. The officers looked at her the way someone looks at a crying woman on the side of the road. Half sympathy, half fear. "You said you live alone?" one asked. "Yes," Emma said, voice flat. "Have you been experiencing any hallucinations? Hearing things, maybe?" She didn't answer. That night, her doorbell rang again. This time, she didn't look. She didn't have to. Because she heard it on the other side of the door. Breathing. Soft. Steady. Patient. It stayed there until dawn. When she finally opened the door, she found another package wrapped in the same cloth as the journal. Only this one wasn't a book. It was a jawbone. Small. Human. With baby teeth. There was a note tucked under it. "What you bury grows." She locked the door and took the bone to the bathroom, wrapping it in towels, unsure whether to hide it or burn it. But when she turned the tap to rinse the dirt away, the sink filled not with water, but blood. Thick, dark, and warm. It kept running even after she shut the valve. She dropped the jawbone. It hit the porcelain and cracked in half. And from the cracked halves, worms spilled out, tiny, wriggling, pale things that skittered like fingers, searching for purchase. She screamed, threw them in the toilet, flushed again and again, scrubbing her hands raw until the sink was empty. But in the mirror above the faucet, her reflection didn't move. She had stopped scrubbing, but her double kept going. Harder, faster, until her skin peeled. And then it smiled. The mirror cracked. That night, her dreams didn't wait for her to close her eyes. They opened the door anyway. Emma found herself in the hallway again. The same endless corridor from her dreams, but this time there were no lights at all. Only whispers, from behind the doors. Soft voices calling her name in voices she recognized but couldn't place. One was her father's. He'd been dead for 7 years. Another sounded like her childhood best friend, Lacey, the one who went missing at 12 and was never found. As she walked, the hallway stretched. The doors grew taller, and one by one, the voices stopped, each time followed by a thud, like something heavy dropping behind the door. Then she reached the handleless one. It was bleeding. A thick tar, like sludge oozed from the seams, dripping onto the floor and trailing back the way she'd come. She reached out, unable to stop herself. And the door whispered, "You're already in." It opened. Inside was her house, but not her house. A perfect replica, except nothing was right. The couch was on the ceiling. Pictures moved on the walls like trapped insects. And the version of herself that walked past the kitchen didn't have eyes, just hollow sockets dripping the same black tar. She turned to leave, but there was no hallway behind her anymore. Only more house, more doors, more her. In every mirror on every wall she saw herself, but each version changed slightly. One was missing its jaw. One had clawed its chest open to reveal nothing inside. One wept worms. They all smiled. When she woke, it wasn't in her bed, it was in the hallway, in her real house. The lights were off, and all the doors were open. She ran to the front door, locked, windows nailed shut. The sky outside was the wrong color, dull purple, like a bruise spreading across the world. Something was wrong with time. Her phone said 3:03. The microwave said 11:11. Her wristwatch ticked backward. She sat on the floor and rocked herself until morning. When the sun rose, if that's what it was, it brought something with it. Knocking. From the basement, not pounding, not urgent. Just a steady, polite knock, knock, knock. It didn't stop. All day it knocked. All night. By the third day, she cracked. She opened the basement door and listened. The knocking stopped. From the dark below, a single voice called up. Emma, her own voice. Broken, begging, "Help me, I can't find the door." And she realized then whatever was knocking, it never wanted in. It was already inside. It wanted her to come down. Emma didn't move from the top step for what felt like hours. The door to the basement yawned open before her like a mouth left ajar mid-sentence. The voice that had called her name, so eerily close to her own, still rang in her ears, but now the basement had gone silent again. The kind of silence that wrapped around her spine and whispered that she was being watched from below. She leaned forward slightly, as if the dark would part itself if she just squinted hard enough, but nothing emerged. No figure. No breathing. No sound. Just the soft creak of her weight pressing the old wood beneath her foot. She should have closed the door. Slammed it, nailed it shut, left the house if she still could, but her body betrayed her. One step down, then another, until the weak bulb hanging at the bottom of the stairs buzzed to life on its own, casting long, slanted shadows along the concrete walls. The space looked the same as before, but the air, oh God, the air was wrong. It didn't feel like air at all. It clung to her skin, greasy and cold, with a faint scent of rot and wet stone. And beneath all that, something older. Something that made her mouth fill with the taste of pennies and dirt. She didn't see anything at first. The water heater stood exactly where it always had, humming its slow, mechanical hum. The laundry machine sat quiet. Lids closed, unplugged since she moved in. But in the far corner, where the shadows pooled thickest, something shimmered. Not with light. There was no light, but with movement. Like the darkness itself was breathing. She stepped closer. The air grew heavier, thicker with every footstep. The humming grew louder too, except now it wasn't coming from the machines. It was under the floor. She crouched. The concrete was cracked, jagged lines snaking outward from a single spot like veins. In the center was the symbol, again. 3 circles connected by a crooked line, dug deep into the floor, the grooves filled with something dark and fresh. She didn't want to know what it was, but her hand reached toward it anyway. Her fingers brushed the edge of the symbol, and the floor shivered. A low groan escaped the ground, not like something moving beneath it, but like the house itself was in pain, or waking up. Then the voice came again, louder this time. Emma. It didn't come from above. It didn't echo down. It came through the concrete. Right beneath her. Emma, help me. It's cold. I can't see. She staggered back, hands shaking, staring at the ground like it might crack open and spill something unspeakable. That's when she noticed the outline of a door, perfectly square, worn into the concrete like it had always been there, but hidden under the surface. At each corner, small metal plates bolted down the edges. They looked like hinges, but there was no handle, no lock, no indication it could open at all. And yet it began to rise, slowly, stone grinding against stone, as the square in the floor lifted from beneath. The smell hit her first, sweet, cloying, putrid, like fruit left to die in a sealed box. Her stomach turned, her eyes watered. The slab rose just an inch, but it was enough to let her see what was inside. Stairs, not leading down, but curving inward like the beginning of a spiral, carved from the same stone as the foundation, slick with some kind of oil that shimmered in the flickering light of the single bulb above. She should have run. Instead, she listened. From below, the voice again. Her voice spoke one last time. I can't tell which one I am anymore. The hatch slammed shut, just like that. No wind, no force, just choice. The stairs vanished. The symbol went dark. The cracks sealed, like a mouth smiling after swallowing something whole. Emma stood in the middle of the basement, not breathing, not blinking. When she turned to leave, the bulb popped above her. Everything fell into darkness. She ran up the steps in blind panic, banging against the basement door so hard the knob finally gave way, the wood splintering just as she flung herself out into the hallway. Her house had changed. The lights were out, yet everything seemed brighter, wrongly so. A pale glow, like moonlight where there was no moon. And all around her, the walls shifted. Subtle things. A picture frame hung crooked that had been straight for weeks. The runner rug in the hallway stretched too far. She checked the clock. It read 3:03 again. She checked the microwave. 11:11. Her wristwatch had stopped. In the living room, the television flickered on. Static. Then, an image. The hallway again. The one from her dreams. Only now, something walked it, limping slowly, dragging one foot behind the other. A long arm scraped along the wall, leaving a trail of something dark and glistening. The figure paused at the door with no handle, pressed its forehead to it, and began to laugh. Emma yanked the power cord out of the wall. The TV stayed on. She smashed the screen with a lamp. Sparks flew. The image flickered once, then went black. Silence returned. Then came a knock. Not from the front door. Not the basement. From inside the house. From the hallway closet. The one she never used. The one she never opened. She turned slowly, footsteps silent on the floor. The door to the closet rattled. Not violently, just enough. And then the voice, hoarse, broken, unmistakably her own, said, "You're almost ripe." The handle turned. She ran to the front door, tore the locks open with trembling fingers, flung it wide, and saw the street outside, or what was left of it. Ashmere Lane stretched on, but now the houses were wrong. Half-built, melting. Some sideways, some folded in on themselves like broken bones. Trees stood leafless, pulsing as if they breathed. And far in the distance, the Delaney house loomed, not at the end of the street anymore, but everywhere. Copies of it stacked like nesting dolls, each one more distorted than the last. Its windows weren't windows, they were eyes. The street had become a loop. She screamed, ran, and no matter which direction she chose, she ended up back at her front porch. Her house watching her. Waiting. Inside, the closet door stood open. Empty, except for her coat. Dripping with the same black tar she'd seen under the floor. She didn't remember putting it there. She didn't remember owning it. That night, she didn't dream. Instead, she heard whispering from the attic. Voices that said one thing over and over. "There's more of you to make." Emma didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Not after what she'd seen. The closet had closed itself sometime before dawn, as if satisfied she'd looked. As if it only needed her to know it had opened. And now, the house felt different. Not haunted, not exactly. Possessed, but not by a spirit, something else. Something that made the walls feel warm, too warm. Like they had blood pumping through them. Like the pipes weren't carrying water anymore, but something thicker, something slower. Her ears rang in the silence, as if the house was humming a tune she couldn't quite hear yet. She didn't dare go back to the basement. That hatch, that impossible spiral, was gone now, sealed shut like it had never been there. But she could still feel it under her feet, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat buried under stone. It wasn't gone, just deeper, just quieter. The attic, though, that was new. She'd never even opened that door since moving in. It had always been there, of course, a simple pull, down ladder in the hallway ceiling. But until now, it hadn't asked for her attention. Now it called to her, not loudly, just constantly. A low pressure in the back of her skull, the kind that makes your thoughts slide sideways. She paced for an hour before finally giving in. The ladder unfolded easily, creaking as though it hadn't been touched in decades. Dust floated in the stale air above her as she climbed, each step groaning under her weight. The smell hit her first, old rot and something sweet, familiar, like apples gone bad, like skin trying to remember how to breathe. She reached the top, pushed the panel up, and froze. The attic wasn't empty. It wasn't an attic at all. It was a room. Identical to her childhood bedroom. Not just similar, identical. Same yellow wallpaper with little sunflowers. Same dollhouse in the corner. Half collapsed from the day she'd stepped on it as a child. Even the same water stain on the ceiling, shaped like a crooked heart. But she hadn't lived in that house in 20 years. Her foot stepped onto the floor, and the door behind her slammed shut. The ladder retracted with a snap. She was locked in. She walked slowly through the room, too stunned to scream. Too stunned to do anything but look. Her hands shook as she touched the desk, the chipped paint on the edges. The little carved EFIL from the time she and Lacey had sworn to be best friends forever. Even the notebook on the desk was the same. She opened it and flipped through the pages. They were blank, until the last one. Written in sharp, deliberate print, "This is where you die." Emma stumbled back. The dollhouse creaked. She turned. A child sat beside it now, head bowed, hair tangled and dripping, as if she'd just climbed from a pond. Emma opened her mouth to speak, but the girl looked up, and it was her again. Younger, 8, maybe 9. Her eyes were hollow, not black, just empty. Drained, like someone had scooped out the color, the memory, the self. "I thought you'd come sooner," the girl said in Emma's voice. Softer, lighter, from a time before pain had weight. "What is this?" Emma whispered. "Who are you?" The girl smiled. "You know, you've always known." Emma backed up toward the door, reaching for the ladder that wasn't there. The girl stood slowly, her bones cracking with every motion, her limbs moving slightly out of sync, like she was a puppet learning to move for the first time. "You buried me here," the girl said. Emma shook her head. "No, that's not possible. You forgot. That's why I chose you." The air in the attic thickened. The walls began to twitch. The sunflower wallpaper peeled, revealing something underneath. Words scrawled over and over in jagged lines. "I remember you. I remember you. I remember you." The child stepped forward. "You broke. When Lacey disappeared, you cracked. When your father died, you shattered. But something filled the cracks. Something old. Something waiting." Emma's back hit the wall. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in dirt again. Just like the dream. Just like the day she dug under the porch. But now it wasn't just on her hands. It was crawling up her arms, across her skin, seeping into her mouth. "Don't you see?" the girl whispered. "You're not haunted. You're remembered." The attic began to twist. The corners bent upward, and the ceiling stretched higher. The room fell into itself, shifting like a throat preparing to swallow. The girl's face began to split at the seams, opening into a grin that reached both ears. "Let me back in," she said. "Finish what you started." Emma screamed. The floor dropped, and she fell, not like falling from a ladder. This fall took time. This fall had distance. She passed through memories like pages. Her mother screaming in the hospital room. The day she found her father's belt hanging in the garage. The sound of Lacey's voice the last time she heard it. "Wait here. I'll come back." She landed in darkness. Not blackness, darkness. Thick. Breathing. A living dark. When her eyes adjusted, she was back in the hallway. The door without a handle stood ahead, but now it was open. Inside, she saw herself again, sitting in a chair, skin gray, hair white, mouth sewn shut, but the eyes were alive, wide, wet with tears. Emma stepped closer, and the other her lifted its hand slowly, shaking, pointing at the ceiling. Above, dozens of her faces stared down, twisted into masks, some smiling, some crying, all silently mouthing the same word, "Stay." She turned to run, but the hallway was gone. Just the room now, and the chair, and her, and one more thing, a mirror. In it, she saw herself, her real self, and she was smiling, but she wasn't in control. From inside, something else blinked, then said, without her lips moving almost whole, the lights blew out. Emma woke up in her bed. Morning sun leaked through the windows. Birds chirped. Her coffee pot gurgled in the kitchen. Everything was normal, except for one thing. There were 2 coffee mugs on the counter, and someone humming in the shower. She lived alone. Emma stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, staring at the 2 coffee mugs sitting side by side like quiet accusations. One was hers, ceramic, chipped on the handle, with a faint coffee ring that never scrubbed clean. The other she didn't recognize. Taller, glossy, still steaming. A fresh mug, a visitor's mug. That was the first sign. The second was the humming, soft, tuneless, and coming from the bathroom, where the water was running, and someone moved behind the curtain like they'd always belonged there. She reached for her phone out of habit, out of panic, but it wasn't on the counter. It wasn't anywhere. She backed away, bumping into a chair that hadn't been pushed in the night before. The moment her body touched it, she knew something was wrong. The seat was warm, used. Someone had been sitting in it just minutes ago. The humming grew louder. The water stopped. The sound of the curtain sliding across the rod was a whisper, but in that dead silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. Emma didn't move. She could hear wet footsteps on the tile. Then the soft slap of bare feet against the hallway floor. Closer, slow, and then it spoke. "I like it here." It was her voice, not a mimic, not an echo. Her voice, but lighter, smoother. It came from just around the corner, hidden behind the archway that led from the hall to the kitchen. The way it said those 4 words made her skin crawl. Not because they were strange, but because of the fondness in them. Like the thing speaking had settled in, had tasted life inside her home, and decided it was good. Emma grabbed the nearest object she could, an old wooden rolling pin from the drawer, and held it like a weapon. Her breath came sharp, ragged. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the next sentence. "I forgot how it feels to be real." Emma inched closer to the hallway, careful not to let the floorboards creak beneath her. She peeked around the corner. The hallway was empty. The bathroom door stood wide open. Steam billowed out, clinging to the ceiling. Drops of water led from the threshold down the hall. But there were no footprints. Just the sound of humming again, now coming from inside the kitchen behind her. She turned, swinging wildly. No one. The room was empty. But the second mug was gone, and a faint trail of water led to the basement door. She didn't want to look. Every cell in her body screamed, "Don't open it, don't go down, don't feed it." But her hand reached for the knob on its own. Turned it, pulled it open. No stairs, just a mirror, mounted on the inside of the door. And in the reflection, she saw herself. Only, she wasn't moving. Her real self was still, frozen, and the reflection waved. Emma slammed the door shut and stumbled backward, hands trembling. Her mind raced for explanations, stress, sleepwalking, mental breaks. But nothing fit. None of those things smiled back at you with your own mouth while you stood and watched. She called out, her voice cracking. "Who are you?" Silence. Then a whisper from somewhere in the house. Again, her own voice. "You let me in." That night, she found the 3rd bedroom unlocked. She had kept it shut since moving in, hadn't furnished it. Just used it for boxes, old clothes, junk. But now the door stood open, the light on, and inside was something impossible. A fully made bed, clean sheets, headboard nailed to the wall, and photographs, dozens of them, of her, but not taken by her. They were grainy, slightly off center. Her sleeping, eating, sitting on the porch. In one, she's reading Madeline's journal. In another, she's in the bathtub. Every angle suggested the same thing. Someone else had been in the house long before she noticed. There was one more photo left on the pillow. Her, standing outside the Delaney house, smiling. But she had no memory of being there. Not like that. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. She locked herself in her bedroom, pushed furniture against the door, left every light on. But somewhere around 3:03 a.m., the witching hour her clocks could never escape, she heard it again. Humming, but now it came from inside her room. Emma turned slowly. The mirror above her dresser had fogged. Not from steam, from breath. 3 words appeared in the condensation, "Let me stay." She picked up the lamp and smashed the glass. The moment it shattered, something hissed behind her. She spun, but there was nothing. Only her closet door swinging slightly on its hinges. Inside was her coat again, still dripping. Still not hers, but this time, it was hanging beside something else. Another coat, identical, same color, same size, only covered in handprints, child-sized. The air in the room grew thick. The lights flickered. She looked down and saw dirt spreading from under her bed, like it had seeped up from the floorboards. She dropped to her knees, shoved the bed aside, and found something she knew had never been there before, a trapdoor. identical to the one that had appeared in the basement, carved with the same three-circle symbol. This time, the door opened by itself. Inside, darkness. Inside, breathing. Inside, a single voice whispered, "We can't both be you." She stepped back, but the trapdoor swung wide, and a hand reached out, her hand. Only pale, rotten, caked in soil, and it was smiling. Emma didn't scream. Her throat wanted to, lungs full of fire, but the sound never made it past her tongue. She watched as her own hand, gray, bloated, earth-caked, gripped the edge of the trapdoor and began pulling. Slow. Sure, the fingernails were gone. In their place were jagged bits of bone, splintered and yellowing like old teeth. Another hand joined it, identical, and then the top of a head emerged. Her head. Or something wearing her skin like a mask. It hadn't quite figured out how to fit yet. She staggered backward, tripping over the edge of her bed frame and hitting the floor hard. Her head cracked against the wooden boards. Black stars filled her vision. But she didn't pass out. She couldn't. Something deep in her knew, if she closed her eyes now, it would be her that didn't wake up. Something else would stand up in her body, walk through her house, drink her coffee, answer her phone, and smile her smile at the neighbors. The figure continued to rise. Shoulders, then torso, then knees that bent the wrong way like a puppet forced into human shape. It didn't speak, not with its mouth. But inside Emma's head, something shifted. Like a second voice pressed against her thoughts, too soft to understand but too loud to ignore. It knew her, not just facts or memories. It knew what she tasted when she bit her nails. It knew the songs she sang in her head when she was scared. It knew what she buried, what she burned, what she forgot. She crawled backward, dragging herself toward the door, nails digging grooves in the floor. The creature stepped fully out of the trapdoor. Its feet were bare, blackened by soil that seemed to spread wherever it touched. The floorboards beneath it rotted with every step. Its smile widened, lips tearing slightly at the corners but never bleeding. It was her. Almost. "Give it back," it said. Emma choked. "What?" "My place," it whispered. "You stole it. You kept breathing when I was left behind. You buried me." "I don't." She gasped. "I don't know you. I never buried anyone. I never." But her voice died in her throat as the creature turned its head sharply toward the mirror on the wall. The glass was whole again. Her reflection stared back. Only it wasn't mimicking her. It was watching her, with hate. And then it opened its mouth and said, "You remember now." The room collapsed inward, not physically, spatially. Like the walls moved closer without actually moving. Her breathing grew shallow, time bent. Her alarm clock blinked from 3:03 to 11:11 to 3:03 again in a stuttering loop. And in the hallway, far beyond the open door, she heard the front door creak. Footsteps entered the house. Not hers, not the thing in her room. Something else. Another version, a third voice now. Deeper, hungrier. "Too late," it said. The creature in front of her twitched. It looked toward the hallway, then back at Emma, almost frantic. It was afraid. Whatever had just come through the front door wasn't on its side, and Emma realized then there were more. Not just one thing pretending to be her. Dozens, maybe more, all circling, all echoing, all waiting for her to slip, to forget who she was, to break in just the right spot. The lights blew out. Darkness swallowed the room. She ran, fumbled through the hallway, following the faint glow of the streetlights outside, though now even that light seemed wrong, orange, sickly, flickering like fireflies caught in a jar. She flung the front door open, stopped. The street was gone. In its place stood a hallway. The same hallway. The hallway. Door after door lining both sides, each door with a different version of her name carved into the wood. Emma D.M. E.M. Ema. Some were scratched. Some burned. One still bled. She turned back toward her house. But the door was gone. Behind her now, only another hallway. They'd collapsed everything. Time, space, home, self. The world had folded, trapped her inside its memory, a memory she'd forgotten. One door creaked open behind her. Just a little. Just enough. She turned toward it slowly, heart hammering in her chest, sweat pouring down her neck. Inside was a hospital room. She stepped in. She knew this place. The faded curtains, the beeping heart monitor, the half-eaten applesauce on the tray. Her father lay in the bed, eyes closed, skin thin as paper. She hadn't visited him that night. She couldn't face it. So she ran. And he died alone. A younger version of her sat by the bedside in the room, eyes glassy, hands clenched. "You said you'd come," the young Emma whispered. "But you didn't." She backed out of the room, hand shaking as she reached for the next door. This one led to a school hallway. Middle school. Lockers dented and lined with peeling stickers. And there, kneeling beside the water fountain, Lacey, tying her shoe. The last time Emma saw her, she reached out. "Lacey?" Lacey looked up. Her eyes were gone. Just black pits, empty and endless. "You waited, and I never came back," she said. Then screamed. High-pitched. Wrong, like the shriek of something not meant to speak. Emma slammed the door shut and ran down the hallway, turning left. Then right, but the doors kept coming. Each one a piece. Each one a memory. Each one a you. The hallway ended in a mirror. She approached slowly. Her reflection waited. It didn't move, didn't mimic, didn't blink. Then it stepped forward, through the glass, and took her hand. "Remember me," it said, "or become me." Behind her, all the doors slammed at once. She screamed. The hallway collapsed inward, and she was back, in her bedroom. Morning light, the smell of coffee, her reflection in the dresser mirror, smiling, whispering, "You're running out of you." Emma didn't rise right away. She lay in bed, stiff, cold, eyes locked on the ceiling where a tiny crack had begun to stretch inch by inch. Since she returned from the hallway that should not have existed. It spread like a thin wound above her, the plaster puckering around it like irritated skin. She counted her breaths, making sure they were still hers. 5 in, 7 out, again, again. But each breath tasted faintly of smoke, like something long dead had burned just out of reach. She turned her head to the mirror. Her reflection sat up before she did. Emma's body tensed, frozen with that kind of fear that speaks in a child's voice, begging silently not to be seen. Her own face stared back at her, except it wasn't tired. It wasn't hollow. It looked alive in a way hers hadn't in years. And the smile it wore wasn't forced. It was proud. "Stay still." The reflection whispered through a smile, its voice like wind under a door. "It's almost your turn." Emma shot upright. Her reflection did not. They were out of sync now. Her stomach lurched. Downstairs, the shower was running again. She stood up carefully, every part of her expecting the mirror to suddenly reach for her, shatter, twist, move. But it didn't. It just stared, waiting, like a loyal dog, patient and grinning. She stepped away from it, not turning her back until she was out of the room. The house felt tight, like the walls had moved closer in the night, like something had breathed in and refused to exhale. She walked to the top of the stairs. From the kitchen below came the unmistakable sound of silverware scraping a plate. Someone was eating. Her legs carried her down the steps despite the icy burn crawling up her spine. Halfway down, she paused. The light coming from the kitchen didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It glowed, steady, warm, inviting, like a fire-lit cabin in a storm. And the scent was familiar. Bacon, eggs, the same breakfast her father used to make on Sunday mornings, before everything fell apart. She turned the corner and saw herself, sitting at the kitchen table, hair tied up, wearing a sweater Emma hadn't seen since college. The other Emma was halfway through a plate of eggs, humming a song that scratched at the edge of her memory. Something from childhood. A tune about a fox, maybe. Or the moon. She didn't look up. She just kept eating, enjoying it. Emma's mouth moved before she thought. "Who are you?" The other Emma chewed slowly, swallowed, and smiled. "You, but less tired." Emma didn't move. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you." The other replied, setting her fork down. "But here we are." A third voice joined them. Quiet, male. She's not ready yet. Emma turned. Sam stood in the kitchen doorway, soaked from the rain that wasn't falling. His beard looked fuller. His eyes were wrong, hollow and deep, like he'd aged backward into something before people had names. He looked between the two Emmas, then stepped aside. Behind him, a figure shuffled into view. A child. No, not quite. Too thin, too slow. Dressed in what looked like hospital linens, except they were smeared in ink. Or blood. The figure dragged something behind it, a sack or a bundle, and it made no sound. Emma stepped back, bile rising in her throat. The other Emma stood. She's starting to see them, she said to Sam. The figure stepped forward and dropped its burden. It was a mirror, cracked down the middle. The child reached out, not toward Emma, but toward the other Emma. It touched her face, gently, lovingly. You were first, it whispered. The room began to dissolve. Not vanish, dissolve. Like the corners of the kitchen were melting, running like watercolor on wet paper. The table folded into itself. The light dimmed, and the walls started to breathe. In, out. Emma turned to run, but her body didn't move. Instead, her feet stepped forward, not by choice, by command. The reflection had taken control. Inside her mind, she felt a second presence tightening like a knot in her ribs. Something coiled and warm, speaking not in words but urges. Eat, sleep, smile, be still. Stop, she whispered. Please. A voice inside her laughed, and outside, the kitchen blinked out like a snuffed candle. She was back in the hallway. This time, the doors were gone. Only mirrors now. Hundreds of them, endless, each one showing a version of herself she'd never seen. One screaming, one bleeding, one holding a dead infant, one aged beyond time. One laughing in a way that stripped the meaning from the word. She walked. Each step forward made the mirrors hum. She began to hear the sound beneath the sound. A heartbeat not hers, louder with every footstep. At the far end of the hall stood a final mirror, larger than the others, wrapped in chains. Behind it, something shifted. She approached. The chains uncoiled, the glass shimmered, and her reflection stepped forward. But it wasn't her, not anymore. It had no mouth, only eyes, and in its hands it held her face, literally. Skin, a mask, smiling. Emma screamed. The mirror shattered, and she woke up in her backyard, naked, covered in dirt. The sun was rising, her front door stood wide open, and carved into the lawn in perfect, looping script were 3 words, YOIRR, next T. She looked up. In the window of her bedroom, someone pulled the curtain aside and waved. The air outside tasted sour. Emma sat motionless in the grass, skin damp with morning dew and something far more foul clinging to her like oil. Earth, sweat, and something beneath even that, a scent older than rot, deeper than decay. Her breath came shallow as her eyes remained fixed on the figure in the bedroom window. It waved again, slow, deliberate, her exact hand, her exact smile. But it wasn't joy she saw. It was possession. It was comfort. The thing in her room was home. She didn't scream. Her voice had been stolen by whatever force had dragged her from the dream, world hall of mirrors, and dropped her here like discarded meat. She wanted to move, to run, to burn the house down and salt the ground, but her muscles wouldn't obey. They ached, as though she'd spent the entire night digging with her bare hands. Her fingernails confirmed it. Cracked, filthy, blood at the base, and on her palms, new cuts, fresh. She had been digging. Something. Somewhere. The front door creaked slowly, too slowly, like an inhale. Then it stopped, ajar. Waiting, the grass around her began to darken, not from moisture, but from shadow, an absence of light that spread in a perfect ring around her bare feet. Something was crawling beneath the soil. The lawn twitched. Emma forced herself to stand. Every part of her protested. Her knees buckled, her spine spasmed. But she made it upright. Her body trembled as she backed away from the open door, from the thing waving in the window, from her house that was no longer hers. The sun above flickered. Not a cloud passed. It wasn't the weather. It was something else. a shudder in the sky. She looked up and saw, for only a moment, a pattern etched faintly into the pale blue, 3 overlapping circles connected by jagged lines, spread across the sky like veins in an eye. She blinked. Gone. But the birds had stopped singing. The street had gone still. Not empty, still. Ashmere Lane looked untouched, but too untouched, like a painting hung too long in the same place. No movement, no breeze, no sound. Then she noticed the people, standing, motionless. Every neighbor on the street, frozen on their lawns, at windows, behind curtains. Not looking at her, looking past her, or maybe through her, eyes unfocused, smiles stretched too wide. Something was wrong with their faces. Not warped, not grotesque, just off. Like someone trying very hard to draw a human face from memory and getting it almost right. Emma turned and ran. She didn't go inside. She didn't go for her car. She sprinted down the sidewalk barefoot, her feet slapping the concrete, her heart trying to burst from her chest. She didn't care where she went, only that it was away. But Ashmere Lane didn't end. It stretched. Longer than it should be. She ran past her own house 3 times. Different versions of it. In one, the curtains were red. In another, a baby stroller sat on the porch. In the third, the house was burned out, black and skeletal, and yet smoke still rose from the chimney. She collapsed. Her knees gave out just as she reached the 4th iteration of her front yard. It was back to normal. Same bushes, same cracked sidewalk, same open door. The thing in the window was gone, but she knew, with a certainty that reached bone deep, that it was waiting inside. Then came the knock. Behind her. She turned. It wasn't on a door. It was on her back, a sensation like cold fingers drumming softly just beneath her shoulder blades. She screamed. And someone whispered in her ear, "You're starting to fade." Emma shot to her feet, spinning, fists clenched, but there was no one behind her. No breath, no shadow, but the sensation remained, like the echo of hands that had just left her skin. She staggered up the porch steps. Her front door still hung open. She stepped inside. Everything looked normal again. Kitchen clean, lights off. Her reflection in the hall mirror, just as terrified as she was. But it didn't feel right. It didn't feel empty. The silence was back, thick, pressing, breathing. She turned into the living room and stopped. The TV was on. A VHS tape played on a dusty player she didn't own. And the screen showed her, sleeping, night after night, from different angles, from above, from below. One clip showed her opening her eyes slowly, staring directly at the camera. She didn't blink, didn't speak. Then that version of her sat up, looked directly into the lens, and said, "This is how it grows." The TV went black. The couch behind her creaked. Emma turned slowly. A figure sat slouched in her seat, back turned. Damp hair clung to its shoulders. The sound of slow, wet breathing filled the room. She stepped backward. The figure leaned forward, twisting its head slowly to face her. Its mouth hung open, the jaw cracked slightly, and from within came not words, but her voice, distorted, layered over dozens of other voices, all whispering, "If you won't open the door, we will." Emma ran upstairs, slammed the bedroom door behind her, locked it, shoved the dresser in front. She fell to the floor, sobbing, nails biting into her arms to make sure she was still herself. But then, music. The music box. The one from her childhood. It began playing by itself. Soft, hollow off-key. She turned. There it was, on her dresser, where she hadn't seen it in 20 years. She'd buried it with her mother. It opened, and inside a tooth. Small, yellowed, not hers. The mirror above, it warped, and from its surface, her reflection smiled with eyes black as tar and whispered, "What you forget, we become." The room shrank, not physically, but perceptually. The walls bent in quiet ways, angles that seemed to close around Emma without movement. She couldn't breathe right. The air inside her bedroom was thick, sour, like mold had taken root in her lungs. That smell, the same cloying rot of turned soil and spoiled milk, came from the music box. It clinked its jagged melody over and over, the spinning ballerina broken at the waist, moving in warped rotations like it was trying to remember how to dance. The tooth inside the box gleamed. It was too perfect, not chipped or broken or worn like something from a child's mouth should be. It was deliberate, smooth, as if it had never belonged in a mouth at all. Just something that looked like a tooth, carved to resemble humanity in the cruelest way. Emma backed away, but the room wouldn't let her go. Her hand gripped the doorknob behind her, but it no longer turned. The lock was still bolted, the dresser still in place, but she knew, without knowing how, that it wouldn't matter. Whatever had crept in through the cracks in her mind, whatever had slithered through her house while she slept, was already inside the room. The music stopped. The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was listening. An anticipatory hush like a held breath before a scream. From beneath the bed, something whispered, "Do you want to remember now?" Emma dropped to her knees instinctively, heart pounding so hard she thought her ribs might break. Her reflection in the floor-length mirror stared back at her, unmoving, lips parted, teeth showing. Smiling. A voice that wore her tone echoed again. Louder now, "We kept it for you." The edge of the bed shifted. Slow, purposeful. Something pushed upward, the mattress bulging slightly. She leapt back, grabbing the lamp from her nightstand and wielding it like a bat. The bed stilled. But the whispering didn't. It began to name things. Your mother's last words. The name of the thing you saw in the pond when you were 6. Lacey's final scream. Your father's final thought. Each phrase struck her like a blow. Sharp, unfair. Too personal to be guessed, too specific to be tricks. They weren't trying to scare her now. They were reminding her. The door behind her groaned. She turned. The mirror pulsed, not shimmered, pulsed, like a vein under skin. And in it, her reflection still smiled, but now there were more of them. Reflections behind reflections. Each a variation of her. Some younger, some older, some ruined. Their mouths opened one by one until the glass began to fog from the inside. And then they spoke in unison. "Open the floor." Emma turned instinctively to the center of the room, where the rug had begun to move. Just a ripple. A wave of fabric rising ever so slightly, revealing an outline beneath it. Wooden, square, etched. Another trapdoor. She should have run. She meant to. But something in her legs moved without permission. Something in her chest whispered, "You've already seen what's under there." Her hands gripped the edge of the rug and pulled. The floor beneath was carved again with the 3 circles and jagged line, but now the grooves were filled with something fresh. Not blood, not ink. Something alive. It pulsed, glowed faintly, and the trapdoor was already ajar. She could see stairs. Wooden this time, slick with moisture. A draft hit her face, cold and sweet like rain soaked in vinegar. Behind her, the mirror spoke once more. "You were the one who closed it, Emma. You locked the memory. You fed it your silence. Now open it again." Her hand reached for the trapdoor, stopped. She whispered, "What's down there?" And the floor answered with her voice, "The truth. The version of you that didn't survive." That stopped her. Because a part of her had always known she wasn't whole. That some essential piece of her. Courage, innocence, clarity, whatever it was, had been buried somewhere long ago and never fully grown back. Her whole life had felt like walking with phantom limbs, and now that version was calling. So she opened it. The wood moaned like a dying breath. The stairs were slick under her feet. She descended slowly, and as she did, the air changed again. The house above disappeared. The sounds of the world, cars, wind, life, vanished behind the creaking steps. At the bottom was no basement. It was a room. Exactly like her childhood bedroom, down to the scuffed floors, the peeling wallpaper, the stickers on the closet door. But it was wrong. It stank of mildew and iron. There was a child sitting on the bed, facing away. Emma didn't need to ask who it was. She knew. Her. At maybe 9 or 10. Hair long and unbrushed, arms wrapped around her knees, rocking. Slowly. Emma approached. Every step creaked like a coffin lid. When she reached the bed, the girl stopped rocking and said, without turning, "You left me here." Emma swallowed. "I forgot." "No, you pretended to forget." The girl turned. Her eyes were all pupil, black and shimmering, as if they'd soaked in every memory Emma had tried to erase. "You're me?" Emma said. "No," the girl said, smiling too wide. "You're me, the scared one, the one who looked away." The room groaned around them. The air warped. Shadows crawled across the ceiling in silent, spidering lines. The girl stood. "You don't get to leave this time." And then she stepped into Emma. Not at her. Into her. The cold hit first, then the pressure, like lungs filling with water, like a scream being swallowed in reverse. And Emma remembered. Every piece, every flash. Lacey in the woods, smiling, then gone. The pond. The thing in it. The whisper that followed her home. The night her father died, and the door she chose not to open when she heard the crash. The voices. The dreams. The mirror that first watched her. All of it poured back in, and something else came with it. Something that wasn't her, but now knew her. From within, the walls cracked. The trapdoor above slammed shut, and the mirror in the child's room whispered, now we're whole." Emma felt it before she saw it. The slow drift of her thoughts being rerouted, tugged at like threads in a spider's web. She stood there in the replica of her childhood bedroom, no longer just herself. Something else stirred inside her now, not a voice. Not a presence she could speak to or deny, but a feeling. A presence that moved through her memory like it had always lived there, like it had never really left. The girl, her younger self, had vanished the moment she stepped in. Or maybe Emma had vanished. It was hard to tell. Hard to know what part of her still existed as her own. The walls were breathing again. Not in the metaphorical way she used to describe panic. Literally. The wallpaper swelled and deflated in rhythm, soft sighs rising from behind the sheetrock. She could hear them whispering names now, names she hadn't spoken in years. Names of people who were dead, lost, or never existed outside dreams. They weren't calling to her, they were calling for her. She turned to the closet. Something knocked once. Not hard. Not loud. Just enough. The Emma didn't want to open it, but her hand did. The knob turned without resistance. The door creaked, yawning open to reveal darkness. Not a lack of light, but something using darkness. Wearing it. Breathing through it. It hung there like a sheet soaked in shadow, trembling faintly at the bottom like someone hiding underneath. She stared, and it stared back. From behind the dark, two pale eyes opened slowly. Then a hand, then a second, and from that quiet void, a voice whispered, her voice again, but wrong, layered, stretched. "They're waiting for the rest of you." The shadows surged outward. Emma slammed the door, her pulse thundering. She backed away until she hit the bed frame. Every part of her trembled, not just in fear, but in recognition. That thing inside the closet hadn't come to attack her. It came to complete her. That's when she noticed the walls. The sunflower wallpaper was peeling away in long, vertical strips. Underneath it wasn't paint or plaster. It was mirrors. Dozens. Hundreds. All sealed behind the walls like insulation, all reflecting slightly different angles. All reflecting slightly different versions of her. In one, her mouth was sewn shut. In another, her eyes were gone, and her fingers were long, curved things that tapped against the glass in rapid succession like they were trying to get out. Some of them smiled. One pressed its face so close to the glass it began to bleed. And then, all at once, they spoke in perfect, synchronized whisper, "Let us in." Emma ran. Up the stairs. Back through the trapdoor that had somehow become a hatch in the ceiling now. She pulled herself up and into her bedroom, her real bedroom. Or, so she thought. But the moment her knees hit the floor, she knew it wasn't right. It was too quiet, too still. The lights didn't hum, the air didn't move, and outside the window the street was gone. Not just fogged over. Gone. A void. A flat expanse of black with white outlines of houses, as if someone had drawn her neighborhood in chalk, but hadn't filled it in yet. She turned to her mirror. It was blank. No reflection. Then, from behind her, the closet door creaked open again. Not just open, wide, hitting the wall with a hollow thud. Inside hung no clothes, no shoes, just a narrow hallway stretching deeper than it should be. At the end of it, a faint light flickered, and footsteps echoed, heavy, slow, dragging. Emma approached without willing it. Every inch of her body screamed to stop, but her legs moved anyway, like she was on strings pulled by something smiling above. As she entered the closet, she felt the hallway close behind her. There was no more house, no more world, just this corridor. The air grew thick with heat and mold. The lights above flickered once, then steadied in a dull orange. The floorboards beneath her creaked with every step. At the end of the hall, the door stood waiting. It had no handle, no keyhole, just the symbol, 3 circles, jagged line, the mark of it. Emma reached out and pressed her palm to the door. It opened without sound. Inside was a theater. Rows of old, red velvet seats stretched into blackness. The screen was huge, flickering with static, and in the front row sat versions of her. Every seat filled, each one a different her. Some aged, some ruined, some smiling, some screaming, some just staring at the screen like it mattered. Emma stepped into the aisle, unsure whether to run or speak. Then one of the versions looked back, the one closest to the screen. Its eyes were missing, its jaw broken, and in its hand it held another mirror, one not reflecting her, but the room she stood in now. It pointed to the screen. The static cleared, footage played. Emma in her kitchen, then Emma crying in the bath, then Emma digging under the porch, then Emma standing outside the Delaney house at midnight, and then Emma in the theater, turning to look at the screen. She was watching herself watch herself, a loop, an endless echo. Her voice filled the air. Layered with others, this is not a haunting. This is a remembering. The screen exploded. The lights blew out, and all her selves stood at once. They turned to her, marched slowly down the aisles, hands out, smiling, whispering, "One of us has to be real." Emma backed away, heart in her throat, but there was nowhere left to run. She was already surrounded, already chosen, already inside. Emma had stopped believing in rescue days ago, or hours ago. Time had unraveled so completely, so subtly, that it no longer followed rules, no longer ticked in seconds or minutes, but in moments, strung together by the thread of fear. Now she stood motionless in the heart of the impossible, surrounded by endless versions of herself, each one shuffling forward with blank eyes and mouths fixed in a parody of comfort. The air was dense, with something that tasted like rust and mildew. Every breath a question: am I still me? Or am I just one more reflection that forgot it was a mirror? The screen above the stage had gone dark, but the glow it left behind remained. A dull, pulsing light that seemed to come from within the fabric of the room. Her other selves stepped closer, their skin pale and uneven, stretched too tight or too loose. One of them twitched with every movement, as if some unseen hand was yanking at strings just behind the skin. Another dragged a broken leg behind her, foot twisted inward. A third had no mouth at all, just the suggestion of lips smoothed over like clay. They weren't attacking. That was the worst part. They welcomed her. "You've seen it now," one of them said, in her own voice, just slightly out of tune. "You know how it ends." Emma backed away. Her heel bumped into a seat. She turned to run down an aisle, but the rows behind her had closed in, folded like ribs around her exit. Her heartbeat thrummed like a hammer in her ears. The Emma with the missing mouth tilted her head, eyes wide and pleading. "You closed the door once," said another version. Older, face gray and hollow. "But the doors don't forget, they only wait," Emma screamed. "What are you?" They all stopped at once, as if the question struck a nerve they hadn't rehearsed. And one by one, they smiled. "We're the parts you left behind," they said together. voices stacking like echoes inside a well. We're what's left when you forget. Then the ground opened. Not the floor. The ground. Like the entire room had been built atop a crust of false memory. The velvet chairs, the walls, the broken screen, all of it peeled away like layers of skin, revealing what had always been underneath. Dirt, deep, wet, black earth, graves, and bones. Some broken, some gnawed, all familiar. She fell with the room, her scream lost in the rush of collapsing time. When the motion stopped, she was standing in the graveyard. The one from her dreams. Headstones half sunk in the soil, each carved not with names, but with dates. Her birth date. Over and over. The same day. The same year. Dozens of stones. Then came the realization that broke something in her. Each date had one word beneath it. Attempt. Her knees buckled. She dropped beside one grave, running her hand over the stone as if touch could bring clarity. Her fingers brushed across the date, the word, and then a second word began to carve itself into the stone, slowly, as if a knife was dragging through the stone from within. Failure. A voice beside her whispered, "It wasn't always you that made it back." She turned. Another Emma knelt there, hair tangled, wrists bruised. "I woke up once," this one said, "and the world was wrong. Everyone looked the same, but they didn't know me. My mother called me Emily. My house had a yellow door. I don't have a yellow door." Tears welled in her eyes. "So I went back. I went back under." Emma stood, stumbled away, unable to breathe. Her chest ached with the weight of too many selves, too many timelines rubbing against each other like rotted teeth. Every step she took, the mud pulled at her feet. The earth wanted to keep her. The fog rolled in, thick, choking, and through it a cabin appeared. Wooden, sagging, lit from within by a flickering, sickly light. She didn't want to approach it. She did anyway. The cabin's door swung open as she neared. Not by wind, not by her hand. It opened like it knew her. Inside, the walls were made of mirrors, but not reflecting her, reflecting the moments she thought she'd buried. Lacey's pink shoe on the forest path. Her father's blood on the garage floor. Her mother's voice saying, "There's something wrong with her." And in the center of the cabin, the chair. The one from her therapy sessions. The one she sat in at 7 years old and told the woman with the clipboard, "I didn't mean to let it in." The chair was empty now, but a tape recorder sat on the armrest, spinning slowly. Click. A distorted voice played. Emma's voice. Session 23. "I think I'm splitting again. I woke up this morning and didn't remember brushing my teeth, but the toothbrush was wet. My sheets smelled like dirt. And the mirrors, God, the mirrors, are watching again." Another voice cut in. A man. Calm, clinical. "Emma, tell me what the mirrors said." Her recorded voice hesitated. "They said I'm the wrong one." The tape stopped. Emma stepped backward, and the walls began to crack. Behind each mirror, eyes opened, pale, human, familiar, watching her, and whispering, "Choose." One mirror remained unbroken. It showed her, just her, tired, dirty, whole, and smiling, real. Or another lie. She stepped forward. Her hand touched the glass, and it felt warm. Then, everything shattered. There was no impact, no noise, no splintering of glass or scream of twisting time, just a ripple. A soft shudder through the world as Emma stepped forward and touched the final mirror. It didn't shatter. It didn't even resist. The glass gave, like water, and then she was through it. She didn't feel her feet move, didn't feel her breath, didn't feel herself. One moment she stood inside the decaying cabin of mirrors. The next she was blinking against pale light pouring through gauzy curtains. A bedroom. Familiar, clean. The scent of lavender and detergent hung in the air, and for a moment she felt anchored, real, safe. But then she saw the photograph on the dresser. Her, smiling, hair brushed, dressed in clothes she didn't own, next to a man, holding her hand, a child in front of them. Emma didn't have a child, didn't know that man. She moved to the window. Outside, the street looked just like Ashmere Lane, but perfect. The sidewalk was free of cracks, the trees in bloom. Neighbors waved from across the street. A dog barked. A delivery truck drove by playing a cheery tune. The horror sank in slowly. The world hadn't become something else. She had stepped into a version of it where another Emma lived. One who hadn't made the choices she did. One who hadn't opened the door. A television flickered in the living room. The channel already playing. She walked toward it, heart pounding in shallow beats. Each step felt lighter than it should have, as if gravity was unsure whether to hold her. The screen showed home videos. Family moments. Birthday candles, laughter, vacations by the sea. And then, in the final clip, this Emma, looking directly into the camera, speaking. Not to the person filming. To her. "I know you're watching," the screen, Emma said, her voice low, careful, full of warning. "I felt you last night, when I was sleeping. You're bleeding through." Emma stepped back, bile rising in her throat. "I don't know how many of you there are, but the screen," Emma continued. "But this life is mine. You can't take it." The screen went black. Her reflection appeared in the glass. Except it wasn't hers. It was the other Emma's. And she was crying. "Please," the reflection said, "don't let them replace me." The house shifted. Only a little, but just enough. The kitchen light flickered. The walls grew slightly dimmer. The perfection fractured, and from down the hall, a door creaked open. A child's voice called out, "Mom." Emma froze. The voice was small, tired, innocent, and it didn't belong to her. She moved toward the hallway like someone underwater, each step heavier than the last. As she passed the mirror in the hallway, she saw both versions of herself reflected at once. One real, one a pretender. But which was which? The bedroom door stood half open. She pushed it. Inside, the child sat on the bed, a stuffed animal in their lap, eyes wide. They looked up at her and recoiled. "You're not her." Emma's heart snapped in her chest like a pulled cord. She tried to speak. "I didn't mean to come here." Footsteps behind her, fast, sharp. The other Emma stood in the doorway now, breathless, eyes full of tears and rage. "I warned you," she hissed. "I warned you." The world fractured again. The floor trembled beneath her feet. Pictures fell from the walls. A humming started. Low, electrical, like the sound of a wire stretched too tight. The child screamed, lights burst, and then the mirrors came back, sprouting across the walls, dozens, hundreds, reflecting every angle of her, of the room, of the screaming child, of the furious, rightful Emma charging forward. Each reflection began to move differently, smiling, twitching, repeating words over and over, their mouths forming one phrase, "You're the breach." Emma stumbled back into the hallway. The other her followed, arms out, voice shaking. "You opened something. You brought it here." "I didn't mean to." "You let them in!" From behind the mirrors, the pale-eyed versions pressed forward. They were coming. Through glass, through time, through every crack she'd left open. Emma ran, down the stairs, through the kitchen. The house pulsed, the walls bleeding from seams she hadn't noticed before. Photographs wept ink. The refrigerator clicked open, revealing nothing but teeth lining the shelves, and on the table, another music box. Her mother's. Still spinning, still singing. She knocked it over. The tune continued. Emma reached the front door, threw it open, and stepped out, into nothing. No street, no trees, just endless versions of her house, copied like rotten cells, all of them watching, all of them waiting. And in the center of the cul-de-sac of reflections, a towering figure stood, built of limbs and faces, all hers, layered, whispering, "Nowhere is yours anymore." Emma fell to her knees, and behind her, the real Emma, the rightful Emma, stepped onto the porch, holding the child. "I'm closing it," she said softly. "I won't let you do this again." The mirror above the door shattered, and the sky split open, bleeding black. Then came the wind, but it pulled inward, not out, pulling her, pulling Emma, and as she was dragged back into the storm of mirrors, she heard them whisper one last thing: "You were never the only one trying to get out." The fall didn't feel like falling. It felt like being unraveled. Emma spun through the space between reflections, the in-between that had no air, no floor, no up or down, just memory. But not hers alone. Fragments of other Emmas brushed past her like ash on wind. Each fragment showed something. Blood in a porcelain sink, a girl standing at the edge of a frozen lake, a woman in a wedding dress, screaming as her reflection clawed from the mirror. They slid past her in silence, moments stolen from lives she never lived, and yet all of them somehow hers. Then she stopped. Or the world did. She hit ground that wasn't ground. It pulsed like muscle under her palms, warm and wet. She opened her eyes and saw sky, but not the one she remembered. It was dark purple, like bruised fruit, with no stars, no sun. Just clouds that didn't move, and the faint shimmer of eyes watching through them. She stood trembling. The air smelled like rotten lavender, a sick sweetness she knew too well by now. Around her stood a circle of doors, tall, black, covered in handprints. Each one pulsed faintly with movement from the other side. She was in the heart of it now, the spine of the thing. The place beneath all mirrors. The part of the house that had never been built, only grown. Where the walls remembered too much, a voice rose behind her, not whispered. Sung. You are the crack. You are the leak. You are the gap in the teeth. Emma turned and saw a shape. Not human. A towering figure, stitched from silhouettes. Limbs too long, faces weeping from its torso like trapped ghosts. Its head was a writhing knot of mirror shards, all reflecting her. Every step it took peeled sound from the air. I didn't choose this, Emma said, voice raw. You didn't stop it, the figure sang. One hand lifted. Its fingers were mirrors too, long, curved, cold. It reached for her not to kill, but to touch, to claim. She ran. Between the doors, threw one at random, and entered a home, not hers. But close. Ashmere Lane, but cracked. Houses leaning like teeth after a fight. Streetlights flickering with screams instead of light. A dog barking backwards. Time wrong again. She turned to leave, but the door was gone. From inside one of the houses, someone cried out. Her name. Not a whisper. A shout. She followed it, through an overgrown yard, past rusted toys. Inside, the house was rotten. Floors soft with mold, ceilings dripping. Every picture on the walls had her face scratched out. Except one. A child's drawing, pinned by a rusted nail. Stick figures. A woman. A little girl. A black shape with too many legs. Written in crayon below, Mom said, "Don't let her out." Emma turned. The child stood at the end of the hall. Dirty, smiling, holding something behind her back. "Did you let her out?" the girl asked. Emma swallowed hard. "Who?" The girl's smile widened. "You." She vanished in a blink. Gone, like she'd never been. But the thing behind Emma wasn't. She turned, and saw her reflection again. Tall, wrong, wearing her skin like a wet coat. "Every door you passed through, we passed too," it said. Emma grabbed a chair and hurled it through the nearest window. Glass shattered, but behind it wasn't outside. It was inside. Another hallway. Another door. Another Emma, crawling toward her on hands and knees, teeth filed to points, weeping black water from her eyes. "I'll be better," it whimpered. "I'll be better than you." Emma ran. Again, through walls. Through her own face carved into wood. Through whispers repeating her failures like lullabies, until she reached another house. Another trapdoor. Carved this time not with the usual symbol, but with a phrase she'd never seen, the version that forgets his food. She opened it. Inside, the dining room. The one from the old Delaney house, set for a meal no one would ever finish. Plates rusted. Glasses filled with blood. At the head of the table, a mirror. It showed her family. Mother, father, and the girl, Lacey. But they were still. Frozen mid-meal, eyes wide, forks halfway lifted. Then they moved in unison, turned toward her, and said, "You left the door open. Now you feed it." The room shook. The table grew teeth. Emma screamed, ran again, through herself, through memory, until finally she reached the real Ashmere Lane. Quiet, her house at the end. Dark. The window open. She stepped inside. Everything was as it had been weeks ago, before the dreams, before the mirrors. But on her kitchen table sat a note, in her handwriting. She picked it up with shaking hands. If you're reading this, it means you made it back. But you won't stay long. It never lets us hold anything real. Burn the mirrors, seal the doors, bury her before she remembers you again. Her hand began to tremble, because her reflection in the window was smiling, and it wasn't hers anymore. Emma didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the reflection in the window, smiling, wide-eyed, mouth slightly parted like it had just remembered something it wanted to share. But the real horror, the part that set her skin crawling and her teeth grinding quietly together, was how patient the reflection looked. As if it had been waiting for this moment. As if it knew she'd come back. As if she never really left. She stepped backward from the window, the floor creaking under her heel. The reflection didn't mimic her. It didn't flinch. It just tilted its head slightly, curiously, like a dog watching something squirm. Her breath came hard and fast. She reached for the note again, her handwriting, yes, but none of this felt like something she'd written. She read it again, slower this time, heart thudding. If you're reading this, it means you made it back, but you won't stay long. It never lets us hold anything real. She read the last line aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Bury her before she remembers you again. Bury her. Emma didn't have to ask who her was. She felt it now, crawling inside her like a second pulse. Like something wrapped around her organs, coiling tighter every time she tried to forget. The girl. The version of herself that had been locked away beneath the floorboards of her memory. The one who whispered through walls and grinned through glass. The one who had never stopped watching. Suddenly, the house was loud again. Not with noise, but with presence. The walls ticked. The faucet dripped. The floorboards groaned as though someone else had just stepped into the room behind her. Emma turned fast, fists clenched, adrenaline crashing through her veins. But the room was empty. Not empty like unoccupied. Empty like a mouth just before it closes. She forced herself to move, to keep going. She couldn't let it settle back into her. That was the trick. It didn't steal you all at once. It slid in slow, like a thought, a memory, a soft what if that stayed too long in your head. She moved through the house like a stranger. Every room familiar and wrong. The kitchen was too clean. The chair that used to squeak didn't. The fridge hummed in a different key. Her house was wearing a version of itself, just like the thing in the mirror wore her face. In the upstairs hallway, she found the hammer. It wasn't hers. But it was waiting on the floorboards right outside the guest bedroom. She picked it up. The weight of it was real. Cold, comforting in a terrifying way. Her reflection, watching from the hallway mirror, blinked once, then smiled wider. Emma raised the hammer, smashed the mirror. It shattered with a shriek, a high, glassy whine that echoed through the walls. But behind the shards wasn't a wall. It was another room. Dark, cramped, breathing. Without thinking, she stepped through. It was a nursery, empty crib, mobile spinning slowly overhead. A lullaby music box played somewhere in the shadows, and on the wall, scrawled in something thick and dark, she wasn't supposed to wake up. Emma's hands shook. This wasn't her memory. It wasn't her room. But she knew, deep down, it had happened to one of her. One of the Emmas who didn't make it out. One who was buried too deep to remember her own name. The mobile stopped. The music slowed, and a voice, small, childish, but unmistakably hers, whispered from beneath the crib, "Are you going to put me back in the ground now?" Emma stepped back, pulse exploding in her ears. "No," she said, "not again." A laugh, drawn. "You always say that, but you always do." The floor under her feet began to rise, not physically, but in a way she couldn't comprehend. The room shifted up, as if the ceiling was falling away and the ground was becoming the sky. Gravity swam, her stomach turned. And suddenly, She was standing outside again, in her backyard, at the place where she had once dug. The shovel was already there, buried halfway in the dirt, waiting. She didn't remember putting it there, but she walked to it, gripped the handle, and began to dig. The dirt came up too easily. The ground wanted her to find it. It wasn't long before her shovel hit something hard. She dropped to her knees, brushed away the loose soil with trembling hands. Wood, a small box, just big enough for. No, she pried it open. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, was a mirror. Tiny, oval, shaped. The kind you keep in your pocket. It was cracked down the center, but her reflection still looked up at her. Only, it wasn't cracking from damage. It was cracking from within. Her reflection opened its mouth and whispered, "You're not the first to bury me, but you will be the last." Emma slammed the lid shut, but the earth opened behind her with a deep, rumbling sigh. Like lungs exhaling after a long nap, she turned slowly. The child was standing there, half covered in soil, hair hanging in strings over her face, eyes wide, mouth stitched shut with rusted wire. Emma fell to her knees. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know what I was doing." The girl tilted her head, and from the shadows behind her, voices answered. "All of you say that. Dozens of voices, hundreds, each one her own." And as the girl stepped forward, dragging her hand through the dirt, Emma understood. This wasn't about memory. This was about debt. And she'd been living on borrowed identity since the moment she turned away from the door in the dream. The ground opened one last time, and it whispered, "Now. Choose who stays." Emma couldn't speak. The words stuck somewhere between her breath and her bones, swallowed by the weight of the moment. She knelt before the stitched mouth girl, her hands stained with dirt, her knees sinking into the soft soil of a backyard that no longer belonged to the world she understood. The girl stood still, half buried and wholly awake, staring with those wide, unblinking eyes, eyes that had no age, no innocence. They didn't accuse. They didn't forgive. They simply waited. The voices behind her echoed again, softer now, like a crowd holding its breath. "Choose who stays." The meaning folded around Emma like a noose. This wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about guilt. It was balance. There had been too many openings. Too many doors forced open. Too many selves that wandered through reflections not meant for them. Now the world, whatever this world had become, was closing the ledger. Her or the girl. One would stay. One would go back into the ground. Emma looked down at the box she had unearthed. The tiny mirror inside still vibrated faintly, as if it were full of trapped breath. Her face inside it looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Not confused. Not afraid. Ready? She touched it again. The glass shimmered beneath her fingers. Her reflection's mouth moved without making sound, but she could hear the words anyway. Inside her skull, across her memories. Through every piece of her that had ever broken, "You made me. Now unmake me." The girl didn't move, didn't blink, but the soil around her feet had begun to pulse, rising gently, swallowing her inch by inch, like a mother pulling a child into her arms. The earth wanted her back, welcomed her. Emma shook her head, barely breathing. "I didn't mean to leave you," she whispered. "I thought if I forgot you, you couldn't hurt me." The wind picked up, but only in the backyard. It circled the edges, stirring the trees in a silent spiral. No rustle, no howl, just motion. The stitched mouth girl tilted her head. From behind the wires that sealed her lips, a wet sound began. A vibration, a push of voice struggling through the impossible. Emma leaned forward. The stitches blood, but still, the girl tried to speak. Emma reached for her. Hands trembling, not with fear, but with something else now, recognition. Not of the girl, but of herself. The girl was a wound, a preserved hurt. Not a ghost, but a memory with teeth. And now that memory stood before her, wanting only one thing, closure. Emma lowered her hand, let the mirror fall back into the box, closed the lid, and whispered, "Come back." The stitched girl's body went still. The wind stopped. Then, With a sound like skin tearing from bark, the stitches across her lips split. Threads snapped, fell away, rust flaking into the dirt. Her mouth opened. She took her first breath and spoke in Emma's voice, but younger, weaker. I was so cold. Emma pulled her forward, held her, felt how light she was. How real, I know, she said, her voice cracking, but I remember now. I won't forget again. The earth rumbled. Behind her, the house groaned. The back door burst open, not with force, but with urgency. A presence stood there, not visible, but known. Emma turned, still holding the girl, and in the threshold of the door, the other, the reflection. The one that had been wearing her face in silence for weeks, slipping between mirrors, smiling when she wasn't looking. It stepped out onto the porch. It didn't speak, didn't threaten. It just raised a hand and pointed to the girl in Emma's arms. Then to Emma, and then to the hole in the ground. One of you now. The air grew colder. Time pulled taut. Emma stood. The girl clung to her leg, and Emma said very softly, "Then take me." The reflection paused. Its smile twitched, cracked, and for the first time, it looked uncertain. Emma stepped forward. The girl behind her said, "No." Emma froze, turned. The stitched mouth girl shook her head. "You survived," she said. "You carried all of us." Emma swallowed. "I also forgot you. You had too." The child's eyes shimmered with something strange. Wisdom far older than she should have held. "I don't belong up here." I'm a scream that never stopped echoing. She stepped back into the hole on her own. The soil rose up around her ankles, gently wrapping her in its arms again. Emma ran forward, reaching, but the girl smiled. "Thank you for coming back for me," she said. The earth closed. Seamlessly. The box in Emma's hand turned to ash. The wind stopped. The air warmed. The presence on the porch was gone. So was the mirror in the window. And the house, her house, felt like her own again. Emma stood in the center of the yard, alone now, utterly still. The sky above turned soft gray, a light drizzle falling that smelled of lilac and old books. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just listened. And from deep in the dirt below, she heard a voice whisper, "I'll sleep now." The mirror in her mind finally went dark, and for the first time in weeks, Emma stepped inside her house and didn't see anyone else waiting. Emma didn't sleep that night, though the house finally allowed her the feeling of peace. The walls no longer creaked at unnatural hours. The mirrors held only her own reflection, following her movements as they should. The faucet didn't drip. The refrigerator didn't hum in tongues. And when she walked from room to room, the light switches obeyed her. No flickers, no humming, no sudden shadows. But even with the quiet, sleep wouldn't come. Not because she felt afraid. Fear had evolved into something quieter now, something without teeth. It was suspicion. The lingering sense that nothing real vanishes. Not truly. That memories, like bones, only lie still until something starts digging again. She sat in the living room long after midnight, curled on the couch, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea she'd forgotten to drink. Outside, the rain had thickened into a gentle patter, steady against the windows. Familiar, soothing even. But underneath that sound, buried in the rhythm of the droplets, there was something else. A subtle thump, not from the rain. From below. Emma closed her eyes. Waited. The thump came again. Faint. Dull, like the sound of something knocking from beneath the floorboards. She didn't move. Didn't panic. Because she understood something now. Just because the mirror was dark didn't mean it was empty. Just because the child had gone willingly didn't mean everything she left behind had followed. Emma set down her mug and stood, listening as the knocking faded into silence. It wasn't trying to reach her, not yet. It was reminding her that something still moved beneath. She walked to the back door and opened it. The rain greeted her gently. Her backyard glistened, the soil where she'd buried the girl freshly packed and undisturbed. No footprints, no movement. But in the center, where the shovel once stood, a small object now sat, uncovered, laid out like a gift. Emma stepped barefoot into the wet grass and approached. The wind tugged at her sleeves like a whisper warning her back. She knelt. The object was a photograph. Old, water-warped, faded. She lifted it carefully. It was her. As a child, no more than 7, standing in the woods, smiling. Her hand clasped with someone just outside the frame. Only the edge of another arm visible, thin, pale, too long. The trees behind her leaned at strange angles, as if caught mid-turn. She didn't remember this photo being taken. She didn't remember being there. On the back, in childish scrawl, she came back. She promised to stay this time. Emma felt her stomach hollow, because she recognized the handwriting. It was hers, but not now, then, from before the forgetting. From before she locked away the girl, and the truth, and the night in the woods, when something walked beside her pretending to be a friend. She clutched the photo, backing toward the house. Inside, the lights flickered, just once. And the air changed. Slightly. She wasn't alone again. Not fully. A presence moved with her now, but it didn't press. Didn't threaten. It lingered at the edges of her mind, watching with patience. Because it didn't need to fight for space anymore. It had been inside her for too long. Now it simply waited for when she would look into the mirror, tilt her head, and ask, "Am I still the real one?" She returned to the living room, sat, turned the photograph over in her hands again, and noticed something new. Beneath the writing, almost invisible in the water damage, was a second sentence. Scrawled in the same hand, but newer, fresher. "If you see this," she woke up too. The television turned on, static, then a blurry image, a crib, a woman standing beside it, her back turned. Emma stood slowly, every inch of her body warning her to turn away, to close her eyes. But she couldn't. The woman turned around on the screen, and Emma saw herself, older, eyes blank, smiling gently. She leaned down, picked up the infant, and whispered into its ear, "You'll forget this too." The screen went black. Emma stood frozen, and from the hallway mirror, a soft, wet whisper came. Not loud, not urgent, just familiar. "You closed the wrong door." Emma didn't blink. Couldn't. Her reflection in the hallway mirror stood still, unmoving even as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. It no longer matched her. The light on her face was wrong, her eyes too wide, her mouth too calm. She raised a hand and waved slowly, just a little test, and the mirror woman did nothing. Not a twitch, not a blink, just a slow, steady smile. And Emma felt it, sharp and sudden, the familiar twist in her gut that told her something was behind her. But she didn't turn. Not this time. She was done flinching, done running. She stared into that mirror with the full weight of her awareness and whispered, "Then show me the right one." The lights in the house went out, instantly, not one by one, not gradually. All at once. A perfect silence followed, so thick it swallowed the sound of her breathing. For a moment, she wondered if she'd gone deaf. But no. The heartbeat in her ears proved otherwise. The darkness wasn't blind. It was intentional, like a hand placed over her eyes. The mirror remained faintly lit, still glowing in the blackness. And in it, the reflection began to change. Not like before, not sudden, not violent, but smoothly, gently. Her face aged. Lines crept in around her mouth, her eyes. Her hair dulled. Her shoulders slouched. But her eyes stayed the same, still watching, still smiling. The older version of her placed a hand on the other side of the mirror. Her voice came softly, not from the glass, but from behind Emma. "You think it ends with her," the voice said, "with the stitched girl. But you still haven't asked what door she came through." Emma turned. Nothing there. Just her house. Quiet. Patient. She stepped back from the mirror, her feet guiding her without thought to the stairs. Each step creaked like a voice she hadn't heard in years. She counted them as she climbed. 12. There had always been 13. The missing step was the one under her memory. At the top, the hallway yawned open. Doors lined both sides, more than she remembered. All closed, all identical, but humming faintly beneath their hinges. She opened the second one on the left. It wasn't a room. It was a forest. A perfect replica of the one she'd wandered as a child. Damp leaves underfoot, gray light above, and there, in the clearing, a swing set, old, rusted. Swaying gently though there was no wind. On one of the swings sat a girl. Not the stitched one. This one was smiling, happy, free. She looked up and beamed. "Emma! You came back!" Emma stepped into the room, Forrest, breath caught in her throat. "Who?" "You told me to wait here while you looked for help," the girl said. "You said you'd be back before dark." The memory slammed into her like cold water. This wasn't a dream. This happened. She'd been 8. She'd been playing in the woods with a girl named Marnie. The name burst through the fog like a scream. Marnie. Real, flesh and blood, lauder and scraped knees. But Emma had gone back to get snacks, and gotten lost, and by the time she found her way home, the police were already at her house. Marnie was gone. No body, no footprints, no closure. She'd blocked it out completely. Until now. The swing creaked as Marnie stood. "You took the wrong path home," she said, not angry, not accusing. Just stating it like a truth the world had been whispering all along. Emma's knees buckled. "I didn't mean to. I forgot." "I thought you were supposed to come back through the clearing," Marnie said. "But you turned at the red tree. You took a door that wasn't for you." Emma backed up. "This isn't real." Marnie's smile flickered. "What is?" The forest shimmered, and the clearing shifted. More children stood now. Dozens. All of them girls. All of them familiar. All of them Emma's. But not quite. Slight differences. Different scars, different heights. Different pain behind the eyes. "You've been skipping timelines," one of them said. "Cracking mirrors," said another. "Borrowing names," said a third. Marnie stepped forward. "You closed a door. But the one you came through is still open." Emma turned. The doorway she had entered through was gone. In its place stood a mirror, the oldest one yet, wood-framed, tall as the trees, carved with the symbol, 3 circles, jagged line. The breath caught in her throat. It pulsed. Beckoning. "You can go back," said the Emmas in unison. "But something has to take your place." Emma clenched her fists. "I'm done sacrificing pieces of myself." Marnie shook her head. "No, you're not, because you never did. You always left someone else behind." The mirror shimmered, and inside she saw her real home, Ashmere Lane, her house, the real one, still untouched, still waiting, her bed still warm, her body still curled under the covers, eyes just beginning to open. Emma stepped toward it, and in the forest behind her, the girls whispered one final word: "Choose." Emma stood before the mirror like a woman staring through a window into a home she used to own. Her reflection shimmered faintly, unstable, as if the glass didn't quite know what face to show. Sometimes she was younger, sometimes older, sometimes tired, sometimes smiling. But always her, or at least close enough to wear the shape. Behind her, the clearing full of forgotten selves whispered her name, over and over, soft as rain slipping between leaves. It wasn't a threat, not even a warning, it was a statement. A reminder that the name she wore wasn't hers alone anymore. She was part of a lineage now. A thread pulled through dozens of lives that had folded in on each other like trapped breath. Each Emma left behind another. Each memory buried something that refused to stay dead. And now the glass wanted her back. She stepped closer. Inside the mirror, her home pulsed with warmth. Morning sun spilled through the windows. Birds chirped. Her slippers sat just beside the bed. There was comfort there. Anchored reality. Things with weight and sound and structure. It called to her. But so did the silence behind her. Emma turned her head just enough to glimpse the line of girls at the edge of the clearing. None of them moved. None blinked. But one, the youngest, stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 6. Hair tangled, eyes glassy. No visible wounds, just vacancy. She tilted her head and said, in the smallest voice yet, "You already left once." Emma swallowed. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't come back," the girl replied. A beat of silence passed between them like a skipped heart. Emma looked at the mirror again. Her house, her bed, the warmth of memory. It wasn't just an illusion, it was a promise. One she desperately wanted to believe. But the forest behind her whispered a truth she could no longer ignore. She hadn't just left people behind. She'd left herself behind, piece by piece, year by year, version by version. Every time she looked away, every time she forgot. Every time she woke from a nightmare and pretended it didn't matter, all those pieces ended up here. One breath, that's all it took. She raised her hand, pressed her palm to the mirror, and the world cracked, not shattered, cracked, as though reality had been stretched too thin and was now giving way. A long, deep fracture split across the sky above the clearing, revealing nothing but void behind it. The girls gasped in unison, heads snapping upward. The mirror shuddered. Inside it, her body twitched. Emma stared at herself lying in the bed, the real her, untouched by rot, by memory, by mirrors. And she saw something that hadn't been there before. A shadow. At the foot of the bed, tall, thin, featureless, watching, waiting. The breath left her chest like a final confession. It had followed her back. Or maybe it had never left. Maybe it had been inside the house all along, wearing her life like a mask. Watching the door. Waiting for the version of her that remembered enough to open it again. "You can go," the shadow whispered. And its voice was exactly like her father's. Quiet, warm, familiar. Emma blinked hard. Her mouth moved without meaning to. "You're not him." "No," the shadow replied. "But I know how he made you feel. That's all I need." Behind her, the forest groaned. Something massive stirred beneath the roots. Something ancient. A truth too large to see. And from the depths of that groan, the stitched, mouth girl's voice returned. Not angry, not cruel, just tired. "If you go back, it starts again." Emma looked one last time at the home behind the glass. She saw herself stir in the bed, eyes fluttering open. The room lit by morning. The promise of safety, it wasn't real, not anymore. Maybe it never was. She turned away and stepped back from the mirror. The glass screamed, not with sound but with need. The sunlit bedroom inside rippled like water, trying to pull her back in. But she didn't stop walking. The crack in the sky split wider, and something fell through. A sound like a breath held for centuries finally releasing. The girls in the forest turned inward now facing her, smiling, not with malice, not with madness, with recognition. Emma understood. She wasn't here to escape. She was here to choose. And this time, she was choosing to stay. Not to survive, not to forget, to hold the memory. To be the one who remembers. The forest lit up, not with fire, not with light, but with a presence, an acknowledgement. Like the world had been waiting for this choice. The mirror shattered behind her. The sound was beautiful. And the shadow that had waited in her bed, it screamed as the pieces turned inward and devoured it. No more slipping. No more trading. No more leaving someone behind. And Emma, at the center of it all, smiled. Not because she won, but because she knew who she was now. A girl who remembered everything, and still stood. The next morning rose without a sky. Emma stood beneath a pale stretch of light that flickered like something under a dying bulb. But there was no sun, no horizon, just brightness that had forgotten where to come from. The forest behind her no longer whispered. The girls were gone, vanished without ceremony, as if their presence had only been a test she passed by not running. She was alone now, utterly, except for the house. It stood ahead of her like it had been waiting, half swallowed by the edge of the clearing, crooked but whole. A patchwork of every house she'd ever called home. Her childhood duplex in Ohio, the two-bedroom ranch in Ashmere, the off-campus apartment she fled after one too many shadowed dreams. Windows blinked open and closed. Roof tiles slid into place. The door leaned slightly left, like it had been kicked in too many times to stand straight. And on the steps leading to it, a doormat that simply read. Finally, she approached slowly. Each step forward made the house breathe. Not literally, no rising and falling of walls, no wheezing creaks, but she could feel it. It pulsed beneath her feet like a living thing. The doorknob was warm, almost too warm. The door itself resisted, not in protest, but like it needed to be asked. She pressed her forehead to the wood, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I'm ready." It opened. The house swallowed her, not with violence, not like before. This time it simply accepted her. She passed the threshold and was immediately wrapped in the smell of burnt candles, old cedar, and something sweeter underneath. Honeysuckle, maybe, or the memory of it. The air was dense but breathable. The silence wasn't empty, it was listening. The entryway was filled with doors, some familiar, some impossibly strange. A pale blue one with finger-sized scratches near the base. A round door that looked like a ship's porthole, leaking water onto the floor. One was open just a crack, revealing a single, unmoving eye behind it. But none called to her. None felt right, until she turned left and saw a hallway lined with mirrors. Broken, jagged, but held together by something unseen. They didn't reflect her. Not anymore. They showed moments, scenes. Each mirror a window to something she had buried. She moved down the hall slowly. In the first mirror, herself as a child, standing on a frozen pond, staring down at the ice. Below it, her own face, watching back. Second mirror, a hospital room. Her mother crying quietly in the corner, back turned, a bundle in her arms that never moved. Third, a boy she used to love, standing in a doorway, saying her name like it was the last word he'd ever trust. Emma paused before the fourth. It showed now, herself, older, standing in the hallway of this strange house. Behind her in the reflection, a figure stood, tall, thin, bent slightly forward like it was listening to her thoughts. Emma turned. Nothing. She looked back into the mirror. The figure smiled. Its mouth was full of keys, hundreds, some rusted, some new, all dangling from its teeth like trophies. She touched the mirror, cold, too cold. "Which one opens the door?" she asked. The figure leaned closer, didn't speak. But one key slipped from its lips, fell through the mirror, landed at her feet. A small brass skeleton key, etched with a number 1414. Emma knelt, picked it up, turned toward the row of doors, and now one stood out. A red one, almost blood-colored, with a golden handle tarnished by time. No scratches, no noise, just stillness. She placed the key in the lock. It fit, turned smooth. When the door opened, there was no rush of wind, no blinding light, just a room, one she hadn't seen in years. Her childhood bedroom, not the real one, a perfect replica. Stuffed animals lined the edge of the bed. Posters she hadn't remembered in decades clung to the walls. Her old diary sat open on the desk, still scribbled in glitter pen, and in the bed, her younger self, sleeping peacefully. Emma stepped inside. The door shut behind her. The girl in the bed stirred, mumbling softly in a voice that belonged to neither dream nor waking. "She's not supposed to be here yet." Emma sat at the edge of the bed, watched herself sleep, noticed the tear stains on the pillow, the bitten nails. The hand clutched around a small object under the covers. She reached for it gently, pulled it free. A tiny mirror, cracked, but not broken. The girl's eyes opened, and Emma saw herself, not in the child, not in the mirror, but somewhere in between. "I've been waiting," the girl whispered. "I know," Emma said. "I'm sorry it took so long." The child sat up. "Are we ready to go now?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "No more mirrors," she said. "Just doors." The girl reached for her hand, took it, and smiled. "Then let's find the right one." Together, they turned. The red door opened again. But now, instead of a hallway, there was only one door ahead, unmarked, glowing faintly from within. Behind it, not home, not safety, but truth. And maybe, if they were lucky, a way forward. Emma gripped the child's hand tightly, not out of fear, but for anchoring. The girl's fingers were small, warm, and familiar in a way that stretched far deeper than blood. She wasn't just a younger version of Emma. She was the part that had waited the longest, the part that had endured silence, buried screams, and locked doors without once looking away. They stood before the final threshold now. No number, no symbol, no memory attached. Just the door, softly glowing from within its own frame, as if light were leaking from a wound. Emma glanced at the girl, who nodded without being asked. They stepped through together. There was no hallway, no forest, no familiar trick of space to distort what waited beyond. Instead, there was a room, a round room, endless in a way that defied the shape. It extended far in all directions, and yet wrapped around them with quiet purpose, as if it had always been expecting this meeting, and simply hadn't opened until now. Mirrors filled the walls, but not like before. These were whole, unbroken. They stood tall and perfectly clean, stretching from floor to ceiling, spaced evenly like pillars. Each mirror reflected something different. Some showed Emma at various ages, laughing, crying, screaming into pillows. Others displayed alternate paths: Emma as a doctor, Emma in prison, Emma standing at a cliff's edge with empty eyes. They weren't illusions. They were choices she never made, or perhaps did in other threads she'd forgotten. And at the center of the room stood a pedestal. On it a single mirror, no frame, no reflection, just darkness. The girl let go of her hand and walked toward it. Emma didn't follow right away. Her feet stayed planted, watching the mirrors shift in her periphery. They whispered in silence. Not voices, just ideas, what could have been. The ache of unlived lives, the regret of unknown joys. She saw herself in a life where she never lost Marnie. Another where her mother never left. One where the house never turned on her. But none of them called to her. Not really. Because none of them were truth. She moved toward the center. The girl stood beside the dark mirror, her face unreadable. For a moment, Emma feared the child would step inside it, vanish the way all dreams do when morning arrives. But instead, the girl turned to her and asked, "Do you know what this is?" Emma stared into the black surface. No shape, no light, no shadow, just emptiness so pure it bent the air around it. "No," she said, "but I think it knows me." The girl nodded once. "It's where we go when we stop pretending." The air trembled. Not violently, gently, like a breath held too long. A voice rose from the mirror. Not a whisper, not a command. It said only one thing. "Say your name." Emma hesitated. 1,000 names flickered through her mind, versions of herself, fragments, masks she had worn to cope, to hide, to navigate the cracks. But they weren't her. Not really. She stepped closer. And when the mirror asked again, quieter now, "Say your name," she answered, "Emma Ray Hollow." The mirror breathed in, and for the first time, it reflected her. Not just her appearance. Her essence. Every part of her she'd hidden, forgotten, mutilated in the pursuit of comfort. Her rage, her love, her guilt, her hunger, her need to be seen. It stared back in full, impossible detail. And then, with the softest sound in the world, the mirror shattered. Not violently, not to wound. It simply released itself, fell apart like an old promise. And where it once stood, now hovered a key, shaped like no key she'd ever seen. Long, thin, made from a dark material that pulsed faintly with heartbeat rhythm. The girl stepped back. Emma reached out, closed her fingers around it. And in that instant, every mirror in the room cracked down the middle. Not a scream, a sigh. The room trembled, not falling apart, but exhaling, letting go. Emma turned to the child, who now looked older, not in her face, in her eyes, like she had aged decades in the span of that choice. "What does it open?" Emma asked. The girl smiled, small and sure. "The part of you that you buried first." And she was gone. No vanishing act, no swirl of light, just gone. Emma was alone again. But this time the quiet wasn't absence. It was peace. She left the room with the key gripped tight in her fist. The house welcomed her back, corridors no longer shifting, doors no longer breathing like mouths. She returned to the front of the house and found one last door waiting. One that had been there the entire time, but she had never seen. It was her childhood bedroom door, the real one. scratched from her cat, paint chipped near the handle. She placed the key into the lock. It clicked. The door swung open, and inside was not a room, not a trap, but herself, standing older, whole, holding out a hand. Emma stepped forward, heart thudding, and took it. And the two versions of her merged, not with magic, not with blinding light, just with understanding. The house behind her crumbled quietly, like a coat shed after a long winter. Emma Hollow walked forward, alone, but finally complete. The world didn't end when the house vanished behind her. It folded. Not in some cosmic, dramatic sense, but like a paper map being creased and put away. One moment it was there, looming behind her like a half-buried memory, and the next, only wind remained. No ruin, no splintered frame, just tall grass and open sky. The kind of quiet you only hear in the breath between storms. Emma walked. Where the house had stood, a path had taken its place. Not paved, not marked. It wound through a field that hummed gently beneath her feet, alive in a way that didn't make sense. The grass tilted toward her as she passed, bowing softly. There were no birds, no rustling of animals, just the sound of her breath, steady now, her heart finally ticking like it belonged in her chest again. She didn't ask where she was going. For the first time in what felt like centuries, she wasn't running from anything. She was heading toward something, and she would know it when she reached it. The sky changed gradually. What had started as open daylight, neutral, forgiving, deepened into a soft orange twilight. Then darker, stars blinked into place, one by one, careful not to overwhelm. They weren't stars she recognized, not constellations she could name, but they felt older somehow, less like burning gas and more like eyes, distant and kind. Watching, but not judging. She kept walking until the path ended at a tree. It was massive, larger than any tree had a right to be. Its bark was gray and wrinkled like old hands, roots thick as buildings twisting out of the ground like veins. Its branches stretched into the sky like an apology, like something trying to hold up the heavens, with fingers too tired to keep reaching. There was a door in its trunk, simple, wooden, unpainted. It had no handle, but it opened the moment she stepped close. Inside was darkness. True. Still and absolute. The kind of black that didn't push or pull, didn't hide monsters or welcome dreams. It was just dark. Emma stepped inside. She wasn't afraid. Her feet found steps, and the steps led her down. She didn't stumble, didn't falter. She descended calm and sure, like she was walking back into herself. At the bottom, the light returned. But not from any source. It simply was. A low glow that existed without cause, revealing a cavern beneath the earth, circular like the room of mirrors, but deeper, more ancient. In the center was a stone platform, resting on it a single object. A book. It wasn't dusty, it wasn't ornate. Just a worn leather cover, and a thin red ribbon to mark the last page opened. Emma approached it slowly. Her name was etched into the spine. Emma Hollow, not carved, not printed, grown into the leather like it had always been there. She reached out and opened it. The pages were filled with stories, her stories. Every version of her. Every mirror she'd stepped through, every door she'd opened. Every lie she'd told herself to stay sane. They weren't written in ink. They lived in the paper, moving. Tiny scenes unfolding in flickers of motion, like old film strips. She saw the Stitch girl again, smiling as the dirt swallowed her. Marnie laughing on the swing. Her own face, cracking in a mirror, whispering secrets she was too afraid to hear. At the end of the book, a blank page waited. The ribbon lay across it like a question. A final one. Emma stared at it. Then at the quill resting beside the book. It had no ink pot. Didn't need one. The moment she touched it, warmth surged through her fingers. Memory and emotion and something older, something sacred, the weight of truth. She didn't write a name. She wrote a sentence. 5 words. She didn't think them. They came, as natural as breath. I remember who I am. The cavern pulsed. The book closed on its own, and the tree began to speak. not with words, not in language, but in feeling. Emma understood it without translation. This was the place where names came from, where selves were grown, where the broken were not mended but honored. She felt it wrapping around her, not in vines or chains, but in welcome. Not erasing her pain, carving it into the walls of this place, into the very roots of the tree, so no one could ever forget it again. And in that moment, for the first time since the day the mirror first smiled back, Emma knew peace. No tricks, no doors, no masks, just peace. She sat beside the book and closed her eyes. No sleep took her, no dream claimed her. She simply was, whole and still, until something moved in the dark again, not behind her, from within. Emma didn't react at first. The sensation was too soft, too familiar, like the brush of a strand of hair across her cheek, the way a name half forgotten stirs in the back of your throat. It moved from within her, not in the physical sense. No pain, no possession, but in the spiritual seam where memory and self align. The place she had just finished stitching together. And now something tugged at it, gently. With curiosity, she opened her eyes. The cavern remained the same, quiet, glowing softly, the book closed and resting where she left it. The quill no longer pulsed, but the air had changed. It pressed against her skin differently now, more humid, more aware. Something was with her in the room, not coming down the steps or waiting in the shadows, but rising, like mist, like breath. And then came the voice, her own, but not hers. "Why did you write that?" It echoed softly across the stone walls. Emma didn't move. "Because it's true. You think remembering means you're finished," the voice said, calm, almost amused. "You think this ends just because you've named the shape of your wounds." Emma stood slowly. Her eyes scanned the room again. Nothing, just herself and the book, and the presence. "Where are you?" she asked. "I'm inside the pieces you left out," it replied. "The parts that didn't make it into your little confession. The things you chose not to remember." The floor rippled beneath her feet. Just a twitch, like a breath held too long. From the stone at the room's center, a crack began to spread, a hairline fracture splitting slowly, methodically outward in a perfect spiral. Emma stepped back, and then it emerged, not a creature, not a person, a form, shadow condensed into shape, not black, but colorless, like static, like the smear left behind when a memory is scrubbed too hard. It stood roughly her height, with her outline, with her posture, but hollow, a walking absence. And then it smiled, her smile, not cruel, practiced. "You still don't get it," it said, voice now matching hers down to the syllable, the rhythm, the breath. "You didn't become whole. You chose a version of wholeness that still leaves me behind." Emma clenched her fists. "You're the doubt," she said. "The part that tells me I'm faking it. That I didn't earn healing. That I should be punished. I'm the part you need," it said. "Without me, you don't stay alert. You don't ask the right questions. I'm the one that kept you alive when no one else could. I kept you afraid enough not to walk into the fire. You kept me from walking out of it." She snapped. The room darkened. The tree groaned above, and still the form smiled. It stepped closer, each movement a mirror of her own, like a dance only one of them remembered. Its hands, when raised, trembled the same way hers had that night in the kitchen, the blade slick with guilt. Its eyes flickered with the same panic from the hospital waiting room. The tremble of the first time she heard her own voice break and thought, "I sound like someone else." "You wrote the wrong sentence," it said. Emma stepped forward. "I wrote the only one that mattered." The form cocked its head. "Then prove it." The floor between them split wide, and the void below wasn't dark. It was crowded. Versions of her floated in the chasm, some bleeding, some silent, some curled in fatal positions, eyes open but blind. All of them locked in the moments she couldn't bear to revisit. The girl who found the photo under the rain. The one who stayed in the mirror too long. The one who let Marnie go. They stared up at her with hollow expectation. "This is where you put us," the form said. "You couldn't handle carrying us, so you buried us here." Emma's breath hitched, not in denial, in recognition. The silence thickened, and the form leaned closer, whispering in her ear, "You don't get to walk out until you bring every one of us with you." Then it stepped into the pit, vanished, gone. Emma stood alone again. The book pulsed, softly. A single page fluttered open, blank, waiting. The key appeared in her hand again, the one from the tree. This time, she didn't hesitate. She held the key over the page and began to write, not in ink, but in memory, in shame. In every jagged fragment she had refused to give breath, she named them, one by one. Every version of herself she'd abandoned, every silence she'd let grow between the girl she was and the woman she became. And as she wrote, the pit began to fill, not with earth, not with fire, with light, the kind of light that didn't burn or blind. It welcomed, it recognized, and it forgave. By the time she wrote the final word, the room had begun to dissolve, not collapse. Dissolve, fade into something larger. She looked up, and the last voice she heard was not her own, but a chorus of every version she had just named. "Now you're ready." And then the tree opened its roots and let her out. When Emma stepped out of the tree, the world was not the one she had left behind. The sky was wide and pale, the color of unspoken truths, streaked with threads of gold that shimmered without source. The earth beneath her feet wasn't soil but something softer, like memory shaped into ground, pliable, forgiving. It shifted ever so slightly under her steps, not sinking, not resisting, just adjusting, accepting. She carried no map, no goal. Only the weight of what she had written in the book, the names, the moments, the selves. They pulsed quietly within her, no longer hidden, no longer fighting for breath in dark corners of her mind. They didn't scream anymore. They didn't need to. They trusted her now. She was walking with them, not away from them. In the distance stood a structure, not a building. Not quite. It was made of pieces, driftwood, stone. Bone pages torn from unwritten journals. It rose out of the earth like it had been grown instead of built. The way coral might reach for the ocean's ceiling. It had no windows, only open arches, and each one revealed a different kind of night. One showed a thunderstorm locked in stillness, another, a snowfall that fell upward. It shimmered with the quiet weight of ritual. Emma approached slowly. She didn't need to knock. The moment she passed through the first arch, the space breathed her in, and inside, names. Not voices, not people. Names. They hovered in the air like stars, floating letters, drifting through the space with impossible grace. She recognized none at first, then one. Marnie. It hung just above her, glowing softly, as if relieved to be seen again. A moment later, others followed. The stitched girl. The one who stayed silent. The mirror that smiled. They weren't just people. They were selves, versions, fragments, and all of them had been waiting here, not in exile, in preservation. Held like memories too sacred to be buried, too sharp to be worn every day. At the center of the space, a basin waited, carved from obsidian and filled not with water but reflection. When Emma peered in, she didn't see her face. She saw all the faces she had carried, all the expressions she'd borrowed, all the masks she thought she needed, and behind them, quiet, enduring, was the real one. The face not shaped by trauma or fear or performance. Just her, whole. No one was here to crown her. No ceremony awaited. Instead, a single object rose from the basin, suspended in air. A thread, silver. Thin as a whisper, but it shimmered with impossible strength. She reached out. The moment her fingers brushed it, she heard them again. The names. All of them. Not screaming, not accusing, just returning. They moved into her like breath drawn deep into aching lungs. A reunion. A reclamation. And in that instant, Emma understood what this place truly was. Not a sanctuary. Not a trap. It was the archive. The resting place of every truth too fragile to survive the world outside. And now that she remembered them, they didn't have to stay here anymore. She wound the silver thread around her wrist. It burned, just for a moment. A brand, a promise. The moment it sealed, the basin dried. The names faded. Not lost, but released. Set free to drift into the world again, no longer imprisoned in her silence. Emma stepped back through the arch, and the structure behind her folded in on itself without sound. Gone. Not destroyed, simply done. The world had shifted again. Now there were paths, dozens of them, snaking into hills, valleys, woods. No signs, no guides. But she didn't need one. Every step now carried direction, not because someone told her where to go, but because she knew where she had come from. She walked forward, and the wind spoke, not with words, but with familiarity, carrying sense of places she'd forgotten, voices she hadn't heard since dreams first turned dark. It was gentle, steady, kind. In the distance, something moved, a shape, a person, not menacing, waiting. Emma smiled, because she already knew. Whoever, or whatever, stood ahead wasn't the end. It was another beginning. And this time, she would walk into it remembering everything. The figure ahead didn't move. Not at first. It stood perfectly still at the crest of a shallow hill, outlined in the strange twilight that blanketed this world like a second skin. There were no trees now, no mirrors or doors, no shifting corridors trying to confuse her. The road stretched clear and open, a gentle incline over pale grass that shimmered faintly with each breath of wind. The sky was darker here, bruised with deep indigo and the hint of storm clouds that never moved. It wasn't threatening, just expectant, like the hush before an answer you're afraid to hear. Emma kept walking, not quickly, not cautiously, just steady. As she moved, the silver thread wound around her wrist shimmered with a low pulse, like a heartbeat just beneath the skin. It didn't hurt, it didn't warn, it reminded. Every step forward felt like turning a page that had been glued shut for years. The figure remained still. Emma drew closer. It was a woman. Her back was to Emma, long dark hair stirring slightly in the wind. She wore a simple white dress, the hem brushing the earth like fog. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, relaxed, almost peaceful. But something about her posture, so precise, so unmoving, felt wrong. Not dangerous, not unstable, just fixed, like someone who had waited too long to forget why they were waiting. Emma stopped a few paces behind. "Are you her?" she asked. The woman turned, and Emma saw her own face, older. Not worn, not ruined, just lived in. Eyes framed by lines that hadn't been there in the mirror. Lips pulled into a calm that wasn't forced. She looked real, but it wasn't a reflection. This version of her held something Emma never had. Finality. "I'm the last," the woman said. Her voice was like warm stone, solid, unshaking, the one that stands where it all ends. Or where it should. Emma stepped closer. "Then why are you still here?" "Because you weren't ready to meet me yet," the woman replied. "You had to see every path, every version. You had to gather what you lost. You had to become someone who could survive what I know." Emma searched her eyes. "And what is that?" The woman lifted a hand, pointed behind her. The hill fell away into nothing, not darkness, not fire, just absence, an expanse of white so vast and hollow it made Emma's teeth ache to look at it. It wasn't a threat, it was the end, the real one. The place where stories don't trail off, but cease. "I've stood here for a long time," the older Emma said, "because none of us ever had the courage to choose." Choose what? To end the story, or step off the page. Emma felt her body resist. Her heart thudded a little faster, her breath catching in her throat. There was something deeply unnatural about what lay beyond that hill. Not because it was wrong, but because it was done. A blank page no one dared write on. "You mean die?" Emma whispered. The older self shook her head. "Not in the way you think. This is where you shed the narrative. Where you give up the mirror. Where you stop being the story and become the silence that follows." Emma looked into the void. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was waiting. And for the first time, she felt something loosen in her chest. a knot that had lived there longer than her own memory. She thought of all the doors she'd opened, all the versions of herself she'd faced, and how long she'd fought just to remember who she was. "Why would I walk into that?" she asked. The older Emma stepped beside her. Not as a warning, as a companion, because when you've told the story truthfully, completely, there's nothing left to fear. You walk forward, not to disappear, but to become what comes next. Emma didn't answer. She just stood there. The wind rose, and with it came whispers, not from the void, but from behind. All the names she had remembered, all the selves she had gathered. They spoke with one voice now, quiet and sure. "You are not what happened to you. You are what you carried through it." Emma closed her eyes, and she smiled, because she understood. She didn't have to leap. She didn't have to fall. She just had to step, and trust that whatever was waiting on the other side of silence would recognize her not as broken, but true. So she took the older Emma's hand. They walked together, and when they passed over the edge, there was no scream, no collapse, just a single, quiet word enough. Emma didn't fall. She didn't vanish or dissolve or wake up gasping in her bed. There was no light at the end, no pain, no hall of judgment. The moment she stepped over the edge with the older version of herself, the blankness greeted her like a warm tide. It didn't swallow her. It held her, gently, like it had been crafted to fit her exactly, as if this stillness was tailored for her particular brand of noise. And for the first time in a life of doors and mirrors and haunted air, nothing reached for her. The world beyond the edge wasn't empty. It was quiet, profoundly quiet. Not the silence of something missing, but the kind that comes after everything has finally been said. The piece of a story with no cliffhanger, no epilogue, just a final breath and the knowledge that nothing needs to follow. Emma stood in it, barefoot, grounded on nothing she could see, and yet she felt more stable than she ever had on solid earth. There was no sky, no sun, no ceiling or walls, only softness, a dull, humming comfort that wrapped around her and whispered, "You are safe now." The older version of herself had let go of her hand. She was gone. Not in a cruel way. She had simply done what she was meant to do, waited at the threshold until Emma could arrive and make the choice. And now Emma stood alone, but aloneness didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt earned. Then came the flicker, a soft spark, like the glow of a match struck in the dark, but gentler. It drifted before her, hovering. It pulsed, then slowly unfolded into something new. A shape she hadn't expected. A door, but not like the others. No hinges, no frame. Just a ripple in the fabric of silence, waiting to be stepped through. She approached it with calm, not caution. She had made peace with endings. But this felt different. "Is this another beginning?" she asked aloud, and the world answered, not with words but with feeling. Yes, but not like before, not like any before. She stepped through, and this time she truly woke up, not gasping, not panicked, just opened her eyes to the familiar ceiling of her bedroom, the real one, the ceiling with the tiny crack in the corner that looked like a lightning bolt. The one she hadn't noticed in years because she'd been too afraid to lie still long enough to stare. Morning light poured in through the window. Warm, honest, not pretending to be anything else. Emma sat up slowly. The air in the room felt lighter than it had in months. No whispers. No waiting shadows. The mirror across from her bed didn't ripple. It just reflected, as mirrors should. She stood, walked to it, and for the first time, her reflection didn't stare back like a stranger. It didn't flicker, didn't shift, it just was. Her eyes, her scars, her age, her history, no longer fractured. Downstairs, the kettle screamed from the stovetop, normal. Almost shockingly so. She padded down in bare feet, still half dreaming, half anchored. The tile was cold. Her cat blinked up at her from the counter with indifference. The clock on the wall ticked in rhythm. No messages, no new signs. Just the world she'd left, untouched by the weight of what she'd gone through. And yet, everything was different, because she was. She carried no mirror now, no thread, but something remained. A sense, a strength, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The chair didn't groan, the fridge didn't hum secrets. Everything held still, waiting to see what she would do now that she remembered all of it. And Emma smiled. Not because it was over, but because she finally understood what to do after. There would be no final monster, no twist, no cruel trick waiting at the end of the script. Just choices, real ones, ones she could make without fear. That night, she didn't lock the bedroom door. She didn't sleep with the lamp on. She didn't check the mirror. She didn't have to. Because the mirror had shown her every version she could have been, and she had chosen the only one that mattered, the one who stayed, the one who remembered, the one who walked through all of it, and lived. And somewhere, far from her waking world, beneath the layers of memory and dream and truth, the stitched girl stood in the forest clearing, eyes closed, smiling faintly, the roots no longer wrapped around her ankles. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was free. They all were. The days that followed weren't loud with revelation. Emma didn't wake up to find headlines changed or skies burning with omens. The world didn't react to her return, and maybe that's how she knew it had really happened. The true shifts, the permanent ones, they never come with fireworks. They settle into your bones quietly, unnoticed by everyone else, except for you. And only when you're brushing your teeth, or pouring coffee, or catching yourself in a window reflection that doesn't flinch anymore. She didn't tell anyone. Who could she have told? There weren't words for the things she had seen. At least, not ones that fit into human mouths. Not without twisting. Not without bleeding. And besides, it wasn't a story that needed sharing. It was one that needed keeping. A sacred thing, too fragile for the world that demanded proof before believing. But even as Emma slipped back into her routines, groceries, laundry, emails, the hum of streetlights at dusk, there were signs. Subtle ones. The kind that only show themselves when you're paying attention. A child on the sidewalk stared at her for a moment too long, not with fear, but with recognition. A crow perched outside her window each morning, never cawing, never moving, just watching. In the grocery store, she passed by a mirror on a shelf, one of those decorative kinds with fake gilded edges, and for the briefest moment, her reflection didn't match her movement. It nodded, and then returned to normal, like nothing had happened. She didn't panic, didn't question. She had learned better. Some things don't follow you out because they're chasing. They follow because they belong, and some echoes are earned. Emma began writing again. Not fiction, not memoir, just pages. Words that spilled without effort. She didn't need to force meaning onto them. The meaning was already there, coiled into each sentence like a thread she'd carried from that place. Some nights, she'd wake up with phrases in her head, and by morning, entire paragraphs had appeared in her journal, written in her hand but without memory of penning them. She didn't question it. The house stayed quiet. No creaks at 3 a.m., no voices in the plumbing, no flickering lights, but once, only once, she heard something. A soft hum in the walls, a lullaby, almost, just a few notes, distant and muffled. Familiar, in the way the smell of your childhood blanket is familiar. She leaned her head against the wall and listened until it faded. There was peace in the quiet now, but not ignorance, not denial, just acceptance. Because peace wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to stop running from it. To let it sit beside you, unshackled, and say, you don't get to steer anymore. Emma had started seeing someone, too. It was casual at first. Coffee that turned into walks. Conversations that dipped deeper than expected. She didn't tell him everything, but he didn't press. And there were moments when his hand touched hers and her heart didn't flinch, didn't brace for betrayal or vanish into old patterns. It stayed. It beat. It trusted. Not because she had found someone who could fix her, but because she had stopped needing to be fixed. One night, while folding laundry, she found something she hadn't seen in months. Tucked inside the sleeve of a sweatshirt she didn't remember wearing. A mirror shard, small, smooth-edged, no reflection. She turned it over in her palm and for a moment, just a flicker, she felt the girl again, the one with the stitched mouth and the soil under her nails. But there was no panic, no chill, just gratitude. Emma placed the shard in her nightstand drawer, not to hide it, to keep it. A reminder that some broken pieces aren't meant to be discarded. They're proof that you were shattered and still chose to put yourself back together. One evening, she stood by the window as the sun sank low, the sky blood gold and bruised violet. In the reflection of the glass, she thought she saw her older self again. Just behind her shoulder, watching, not with warning, but with pride. Emma didn't turn. She just whispered, "Thank you." And the reflection smiled, then faded. The next morning, Emma woke to find the silver thread on her wrist had vanished, and in its place, just beneath the skin, a faint shimmer, like something woven into her, not to mark her, but to remind her that she had walked through every fire and come back carrying her name. It started with the smell, not strong, not immediate, just the faintest trace of something familiar woven into the air, like damp stone after rain, like old pages that had been read too many times. It drifted through the living room one afternoon while Emma was reading, barely noticeable. A breath of a place she'd long left behind. Her fingers paused mid-page, the words blurring slightly as her chest tightened with memory. She looked around, half expecting the house to shift, but it didn't. The walls stayed still. The windows held their light, and yet something inside the silence had changed. The air wasn't heavier, it was aware, not watching her, listening. Emma stood slowly, closing the book. The room stretched in that strange, quiet way houses do when they're holding something beneath the floorboards. She walked through the kitchen, past the table, her eyes catching on the corner wall near the pantry. There, a single crack had formed overnight, thin as a hairline, but wide enough to hold a shadow. She stepped closer. It wasn't a shadow cast by light. It was within the wall, something old, not malevolent, not even trying to reach her. It was waiting. She pressed her palm against it. The wall pulsed beneath her skin, faint, rhythmic, like a second heartbeat. Not hers. The house, it seemed, remembered too, and now it wanted to speak. That night, she dreamt of corridors again. Not twisted ones, not traps, but still halls lined with doors, their surfaces breathing slowly in the dark. She walked barefoot, calm, confident. Each door bore no label, no clue, only a strange warmth, like an echo behind each one. One door glowed faintly violet. She touched it, inside her childhood kitchen, but not broken, not distorted. Still, safe. Her mother stood at the stove, humming a tune Emma hadn't heard since she was 8. No words, just the tune. And when her mother turned, she didn't look surprised to see Emma. She looked proud. Her eyes held something Emma had waited years to see. Recognition. The dream shifted. Another door. This one colder. Inside her old bedroom, the night after the mirror first cracked, she saw herself, knees drawn to chest, shaking, eyes hollow. And beside her, the stitched girl, not speaking, not crying, just watching her with compassion. When Emma stepped into the room, the girl finally whispered, "You didn't leave me." Emma kneeled, touched the girl's face gently. "I never could," she said. And in that moment, the girl's stitches faded, mouth whole, eyes clear. She smiled, and behind that smile was something Emma never expected to see: joy. Emma woke with tears on her cheeks, not from pain, from release. The walls in her home no longer pulsed, they settled. Whatever had lingered behind them, watching, waiting, it had been a question all this time, and she had finally given it an answer. She went to the crack in the wall. It was gone. In its place, A faint mark had been left, like a fingerprint in drying paint. A mark only she would notice. She pressed her fingers there again, just once, and whispered, "I remember too." After that day, the air changed. Not just in her house, in her life. Conversations with strangers felt easier, more honest. Music sounded fuller. Her steps felt less like she was bracing for a collapse, and more like she was planting something with each footfall. And slowly, her writing began to shift. What had once been memory poured from her like poetry now. Not neat, but true. She began compiling the pages into something new. Not a journal. Not fiction. A collection of stories that didn't need to make sense to anyone but her. But when she shared one with a friend, their eyes widened. "It feels like I've been here," they said softly. Emma nodded. "You have," she said. "We all have. We just forget." The house never spoke again. It didn't need to. But sometimes, on the edge of sleep, when the wind pushed just right through the cracks in the windows, she could almost hear the stitched girl humming. And she'd hum back, a lullaby for a story that once haunted her and now lived quietly in her bones. Not as a wound, but as part of the structure. The letter arrived without a stamp, without an envelope, folded neatly on her bedside table one morning, resting where she was certain she had left only her glasses and a half-full glass of water. Emma hadn't heard anyone enter. The doors had remained locked, no windows broken, no footprints. Just the note, white paper, handwritten in blue ink. 4 words, careful. Elegant, the room is ready. She stared at it for a long while, longer than she wanted to admit. Not because of fear, but because of the way her chest responded. That old, coiled pressure that had nothing to do with oxygen and everything to do with memory. The words meant something. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Somewhere, something was waiting again, and not in malice, in invitation. By noon, the world had begun to thin around the edges. The sound of traffic outside felt muffled, like it was happening underwater. Her phone wouldn't turn on, and the clocks in her apartment ticked off rhythm. Time itself began to feel loose around her. But she wasn't surprised. Not this time. Her body remembered this quiet unraveling, the moments before the veil lifted, before a new door opened. She packed nothing. She didn't need to. The house knew her now, and wherever this room was, she knew it wouldn't ask her to come armed. At 3:03 p.m., she opened the closet in her bedroom and found a hallway where her clothes should have been. Narrow, long, lined with warm wood panels and lanterns that flickered like fireflies in glass. It didn't frighten her. In fact, stepping through felt strangely like coming home. The hallway led her to a single door at the end. Painted in a color she couldn't name, something between storm cloud and bruised plum. The handle was warm when she touched it, like someone had just let it go. Her heartbeat picked up, not with dread, but anticipation. A hum in her chest, the kind that rises before you meet someone you've waited your whole life to see. She opened the door. Inside a room that was hers, and yet not. It didn't exist in the real world. It never had. And yet she recognized it the way a tree recognizes the soil. The walls were lined with books she hadn't written yet. The desk was covered in pages she remembered drafting only in dreams. Photographs of people she'd never met, but somehow loved hung in delicate wooden frames, eyes smiling at her with a knowing gentleness. At the far end, a mirror, not a threatening one. This mirror didn't distort. It didn't flicker. It simply reflected. Emma stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind her. She didn't check to see if it would open again. That wasn't the point. She wandered the room in silence, fingers tracing spines of books that whispered as she passed, like stories murmuring to their maker. One title stood out, The Versions of You. She opened it. Inside, blank pages. Not because they had nothing to say, because she hadn't written them yet. On the desk sat another letter. This one sealed with red wax. She broke it open. "You've met the house. Now meet the architect." She turned. And there, Standing in the corner that had been empty a moment before was a man. No, not a man. A presence wearing the shape of one. He was tall, dressed in deep gray, eyes the color of old paper. He didn't smile, didn't speak. But there was no menace in him. He simply watched, patient. Emma didn't speak either. She didn't have to. She knew him. Or rather, she had felt him her entire life. The one who built the mirrors. The one who shaped the doors. Not a god. Not a monster. Just the one who made the place between waking and memory. The architect of the house. She stepped toward him. "Why now?" she asked softly. His voice, when it came, wasn't heard, it was felt. "Because you're finally ready to build." A shiver moved down her spine. Not from fear, from understanding. All this time she had wandered a house built from trauma, memory, pain, healing, but never her own design. Until now, the architect raised his hand and revealed a small box. Inside a key, simple, silver, familiar. But it was blank, no shape, no teeth, just a raw piece of potential. "It becomes what you need it to be," he said. Emma took it. And the moment she did, the room began to change. Not falling apart, not twisting. It responded. Walls shifted slightly. A window appeared where there hadn't been one. The books on the shelf rearranged themselves, reordered by the choices she had made, rather than the ones forced upon her. This was no longer the room that waited for her. It was the room she had earned the right to shape. The architect nodded once, then stepped back, and faded, not dramatically, just quietly ceased to be needed. Emma sat at the desk, picked up a pen, and began to write, not her story. The next one. The first line formed without hesitation. "This house does not trap, it remembers." Emma didn't leave the room for what felt like hours, though time inside this place no longer moved in predictable ways. The key rested beside her on the desk, glinting faintly as if it were made of moonlight instead of metal. Each word she wrote on the page changed something small around her, sometimes a sound, sometimes a shadow. When she wrote "open," the window beside her cracked ajar and let in air that smelled like a place she had once been happy in. When she wrote "remember," the light shifted, warmer, softer, as if old laughter had just filled the room and left its trace behind. It wasn't power she held, it was permission. To shape, to alter, to create. She'd spent so long trying to escape the architecture of someone else's trauma that she'd forgotten she could build her own spaces. Not to hide, not to trap herself in comfort, but to listen. And this house, whatever and wherever it was listening back. Not with judgment, not with agenda. Just receptiveness. A mutual agreement between the haunted and the home. The desk drawers held journals she'd never owned but somehow recognized. Each one chronicled dreams she hadn't had yet, people she hadn't met. Every name in the margins tugged at something buried in her chest. These weren't fantasies, they were seeds. Waiting, breathing, ready. Emma paused and looked around. The room had changed again, subtly. The wallpaper now held a faint pattern, her handwriting scrawled in looping cursive. Layered over itself so many times it became texture rather than text. The floorboards beneath her were no longer wood, but something like polished stone, etched with tiny constellations. She crouched down and touched one, and it pulsed faintly under her palm. Each star had a name. She could feel them. Marnie, the stitched girl, the mirror self, the quiet one, all of them, still with her. Still part of the foundation. The house hadn't let them go. It had welcomed them, integrated them. She stood again, the weight of understanding resting softly across her shoulders like a shawl. It didn't burden her. It belonged there. As she walked to the door, the key warmed in her pocket. This time, the door didn't creak or vanish or lead somewhere impossible. It opened into another room, a hallway, a staircase, a home, her home. But not the one she left behind. This one was still being written. Downstairs, she found a kitchen filled with morning light, the smell of coffee brewing before she'd even considered making it. The air had that hush of a space, that had been loved for years. Photographs on the walls showed people she hadn't met yet, places she hadn't been. But nothing felt forced. Nothing felt stolen. These were promises, not illusions. In one frame she saw herself, not posed, not perfect, just present, laughing, hair tied back, a mug in her hand. Her eyes held peace. Not because nothing hurt anymore, but because she'd stopped being afraid of pain. As she walked through the space, the house shifted gently under her steps, never pulling away, never intruding, just listening, adapting, becoming a partner in the life she would now write, rather than a stage built to trap her in performance. At the far end of the hall, a new door had appeared, smaller, painted in a pale green that reminded her of childhood summers. It wasn't calling her. It was inviting. She placed her hand on the knob. Behind it, a child's voice sang softly. No words, just a tune. One she thought she'd forgotten. She opened the door. Inside a small bedroom, books piled by the bed, a stuffed animal on the floor, crayon drawings taped to the wall, and on the bed, curled under the covers, fast asleep, was her, 8 years old, freckles, braided hair, breathing softly, dreamless and safe. Emma stood at the doorway, her throat tightening. She remembered this room. She remembered leaving it. This was the night everything changed. The night the mirror cracked. And yet, here it was, whole, untouched. She stepped in quietly, knelt by the bed, and touched the child's hand. Warm. Real. Emma didn't wake her. She just whispered, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." The girl stirred, but didn't wake. Her fingers curled gently around Emma's. And Emma smiled. Because this was the moment the story turned inward. Not for escape. Not to erase. But to repair what time had frayed. Not to pretend none of it happened. But to ensure the next version of her, the one who would walk forward from this house, knew she had always been worthy of rest, of love, of peace. Emma stood, closed the door gently behind her, and the house exhaled. It would hold the rest. The sorrow, the memories, the names, the nights. So Emma could walk on, not because she forgot, but because now she remembered everything. And she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The house was quiet for weeks. Not the kind of quiet that follows grief or tension, but the fullness that settles in when nothing is missing. Emma moved through the rooms like someone returning to a forgotten rhythm. She made meals without looking over her shoulder. She slept through the night without waking in a sweat. The whispers that used to crawl from the walls had gone still. Not vanished, just resting, the way a story rests after it's been told. But one morning, as she stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a mug, she felt it. Not a sound. Not a shadow. A presence. Something standing just beyond the edge of perception. Emma dried her hands slowly and turned. At the far end of the hallway, a figure stood. Familiar. Not her. Not a stranger either. The figure wore a coat stained with rain, eyes downcast, fingers twitching at their sides like they weren't sure whether to reach out or run. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Emma knew that posture, knew the weight in those shoulders. She had carried it. She stepped toward them. The figure looked up. It was her, again. But not from the mirror or from memory. This was one of the forgotten ones, one of the versions she had never given space to in her reckoning. The one who didn't cry. The one who stayed silent when she should have screamed. The one who made herself small and agreeable and polite until she barely had a shape left. "You're not supposed to be here," Emma said softly, not as a dismissal, but in astonishment. "I never left," the figure whispered. "You just stopped looking." Emma reached out, but her hand passed through the version like breath in cold air. Not a ghost, just an imprint, a memory that had learned to wait. More arrived. From behind corners, out of closets. One stepped into the kitchen from the pantry, another from the shadows behind the staircase. A dozen versions, maybe more. All of them aspects she had never quite acknowledged. Not broken, not dangerous, just uninvited. And yet, now that the house had changed, they found their way back. because now there was space. Emma didn't panic. She walked to the living room and sat on the floor. One by one, the figures gathered around her. Some sat, some stood, some leaned against doorways like they weren't sure how long they'd stay. And Emma said nothing, because sometimes silence is the most sacred form of listening. The stitched girl appeared last. She looked whole now. Her mouth healed, her eyes calm. She didn't sit with the others. She stood behind Emma, one hand gently resting on her shoulder, a quiet kind of anchor. Hours passed, maybe days. Time again moved in its own way within these walls, and slowly the figures began to fade, not disappear, integrate. They didn't need to stay visible anymore. Now they were part of the structure, sewn into the beams, threaded through the wallpaper, echoes that no longer needed to scream. That night, Emma lit a single candle. She carried it from room to room, not to banish shadows, but to invite warmth. In the hallway, she paused. On the wall, a new photograph had appeared, unframed, simple. Her, surrounded by faces only she would recognize. Versions, fragments, ghosts, family, all of them smiling, some faintly, some barely, but smiling. Emma touched the photo gently and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." The house sighed. Content. The next morning, the key was waiting on her pillow again. But this time it wasn't blank. It had teeth now, shaped, ready. Emma understood what that meant. Another door was waiting, not a trap, a choice, and she wasn't afraid to open it. Not anymore. The key felt warmer this time, not just in her hand, but beneath the skin. Like it had been made from her own memory, molded out of every breath she'd taken since she first stepped into the house. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't threatening, it simply belonged. It had waited long enough, and now it pulsed gently against her palm with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, like the two had finally agreed on a shared language. Emma didn't rush. She walked through the house slowly, moving past doorways that no longer shifted or whispered. Each room hummed with quiet awareness, as though the walls were watching her in reverence, not caution. The house had changed because she had changed. There was no longer any question of who was in control. Not power, not dominance, but understanding. She reached the hallway she hadn't entered before. It had been there, of course, hidden in plain sight, just beyond the reach of her gaze, like a corner in a dream you keep forgetting to explore. Now it stood revealed, waiting without urgency. The carpet underfoot was different here, softer, and the walls were lined with photos not of people, but of places she'd never seen but somehow remembered. A stone bridge over a quiet river, a narrow alleyway bathed in orange light, a field of tall grass where a single swing hung from a crooked tree. Each one throbbed faintly with recognition. The door at the end was smaller than she expected. Not grand, not imposing, just precise, painted a pale yellow, faded with time. Its handle the color of old coins. There was no sign, no symbol, only a small engraving at the center, so subtle it took her a moment to recognize it. Her name, not just Emma, but every name she had ever worn, every title she'd been given, every nickname whispered through gritted teeth or soft lullabies. It shimmered in shifting letters, never staying still. The key fit perfectly. Of course it did. The door didn't swing open with drama or sound. It simply accepted her, parting like breath from lips too tired to speak. Inside a room with no shape, no ceiling, no floor, no edges, just space, and within it herself. Not a mirror, not a double, but her, standing in the center, barefoot and radiant, clothed in nothing but light and dust. She looked older and younger all at once, timeless, eternal, exhausted and peaceful. Her eyes met Emma's, and the connection wasn't symbolic. It was familiar. This was the first Emma, the one who existed before the fear, before the mirror cracked, before the stitched girl crawled through the forest, before the rooms turned against her. "You came back, the light," Emma said. "I had to," Emma replied. "No," the light said, stepping closer. "You chose to." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. For a moment, the silence between them thickened. Then the light, Emma raised a hand and opened her palm. Inside, a single match. Wooden, unused. Fragile. Everything you've carried. Every name, every wound, every locked door. You can leave it here. You can burn the house down. Or you can walk out with it behind you, intact, changed, made yours. Emma took the match, held it between her fingers. She turned, and the house was there, not distant, not looming, just present. Waiting, she looked back at the light. What happens if I burn it? She asked. You'll forget, the light, Emma whispered. Not everything, just the weight. The shape, it won't haunt you. But it won't warn you either. Emma looked again at the house, breathing slowly. Then she slipped the match into her pocket. I'm not done remembering, she said. The light smiled and stepped forward, not into her, not away from her. Beside her, and just like that, they were one, not consumed, not overtaken, joined. The way a memory doesn't leave when healed, it changes how you see everything else. Emma turned toward the door again. This time, it opened onto something new, the hallway of her real home, not twisted, not watched, just there, a world she could return to. But now, she would enter it whole, no longer hiding pieces of herself in basements and dreams, no longer flinching when someone said her name, because it was hers again, every part of it, and she had learned to carry it, not like a burden, but like a compass. The house whispered behind her as the door closed, softly, lovingly. Thank you for remembering me. When Emma stepped through the final door, there was no flash, no tear in the air, no flickering sensation of crossing dimensions. It was just her living room. Still bathed in the soft light of late afternoon, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock that had always run 3 minutes fast. The couch was still indented from where she'd last sat, and her tea, now cold, waited on the side table, untouched. But the world had changed. Not visibly, not in the way strangers would point to. The walls were still beige. Her coat still hung crookedly on the back of the door. But there was a stillness now, an exactness in the air that hadn't existed before. She could feel it in her spine, in the steadiness of her breath. For the first time in her life, Emma was not waiting for something to crash through the calm. She trusted the stillness, and the world seemed to notice. Over the next few days, odd things began to happen. Not frightening, just strange. The radio in her car would play songs she hadn't heard in years, ones that had once comforted her in the middle of long, sleepless nights. Strangers on the street would glance at her, pause, and smile. Not with recognition, but with warmth, like they had seen something in her they couldn't name but wanted to hold on to. One evening, as she walked home through the park, a child broke from their mother's hand and ran up to her, handing her a daisy. No words, no explanation, just the flower, offered with sullen eyes. Emma accepted it, and for a second the sky shimmered, just a flicker, like the veil between this world and that house had thinned for a heartbeat. It didn't scare her. She carried the daisy home and placed it in a glass of water beside her bed. The dreams returned, but not like before. No labyrinths, no stitched mouths, no mirrors breathing down her neck. Now she walked through halls of memory like a curator, revisiting pieces of herself that no longer frightened her. She spoke with her mother again in those dreams. Really spoke, without pain twisting the conversation. They laughed. They remembered. Emma began to write again. Not compulsively, not like she was trying to force answers from ink, but because the words felt like old friends. Her stories weren't about trauma anymore. They were about truth. Even the dark pieces, especially those. Because she understood now that writing them didn't reopen wounds. It showed the scars had meaning. She didn't tell people what had happened to her. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't need to. Some things live deeper than language. Some stories aren't meant for everyone. They're meant to sit quietly inside your chest and keep your spine straight when the past tries to pull you under. And sometimes, when she passed certain windows, old ones, dusty ones, warped with age, she would see something move in the glass. Not a threat, not a warning. Just a shadow of the girl she used to be, watching with something close to pride. Emma would nod, keep walking, and the reflection would vanish, satisfied. One afternoon, she received a letter, real this time, stamped, postmarked, addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside a single sentence on a square of parchment, "There is one room left." No explanation. No return address, just that, and deep in her chest, she felt it stir, the house, not as a place, not anymore, but as something within. The house had followed her, folded into the corners of her bones. She wasn't returning to it. She was it. Every step forward now opened something new. Every decision shaped a room she hadn't yet seen. The house wasn't finished. Not yet. And that last room, it wasn't about facing fear, or sealing old wounds, or burning what hurt. It was for living, for filling with laughter, and meals shared, and nights spent in the arms of someone who knew her scars without needing to map them. A room where she could sit with all her past selves, not to fix them, not to silence them, but to celebrate them. The room left wasn't hidden. It was simply the life she had yet to choose, and now she would, with open eyes, and the match still in her pocket, not to destroy, but to light the candles. The door was already open. Emma didn't remember unlocking it. She hadn't even known she'd reached it. One moment, she was standing in the middle of her ordinary kitchen, hands damp from rinsing a plate, the air filled with the scent of lemon and lavender. The next, the hallway stretched before her like a breath she'd been holding for years. No sound, no pull, just presence. The kind that feels like a heartbeat next to your own. It was a simple doorway, no ornate carvings, no strange colors or shifting shadows, but the light spilling from inside was warm, so warm she could feel it on her cheeks before she even crossed the threshold. Golden, familiar. The kind of light you only notice after it's gone and then dream about for the rest of your life. She stepped through. The floor was soft beneath her feet. Not carpet, not wood, something in between. The walls were painted in tones she didn't recognize but loved instantly. Soft greens, faded peach, light, stained gold. The ceiling reached high above her, vaulted and open, and from it hung dozens of lanterns, each glowing with a steady, quiet flicker. None of them were identical. Some swayed slightly as if responding to her presence. Others stayed perfectly still. Each one held a name, not etched, not labeled, known. Emma turned slowly, taking it all in. There were couches, pillows, shelves filled not with books, but objects. Small, meaningful things. A feather, a snapped pencil, a broken locket, a shard of mirror, smooth now, no longer sharp. Every item hummed with a story she had lived, or someone else had given her, or both. These weren't trophies. They were markers. Proof that she had passed through the fire and brought something back that still held beauty. A table sat in the middle of the room, already set for tea. 2 cups. Steam rose from both. Emma didn't flinch. She walked forward, sat down, and waited. The figure appeared across from her, not dramatically. She simply was there, seated already, as if Emma had blinked and missed her entrance. She wore the same face. Older again. Not ancient, not tired, just settled. Her eyes had seen everything, and they still sparkled. "This is it, then," Emma said, voice steady. Her other self nodded. Not an ending. Just the room that comes after the last chapter. Emma wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I thought the house was done." "It's never done," the woman replied. "Not for those who listen. It builds itself with you. You carry the blueprints now." The words sank in without needing to be explained. Emma knew what they meant. The house had only ever grown as far as she had let it. Every door she had opened, every corridor she had faced, every wound she had dared to name, it had given the house shape. Now, for the first time, she had space that asked nothing of her. No test, no mirror, No trick, just comfort. You can stay here, the woman said softly. As long as you need, as long as you want. Emma took a sip of tea. It was perfect. Not because of the flavor, but because she wasn't expecting anything from it. A long silence passed, not awkward, just full. Then Emma spoke. There's someone I want to invite. The other self smiled. You already have. Look. Emma turned. The stitched girl stood in the doorway, unstitched now, smiling, whole. Behind her, the mirror self, the quiet child, the frightened versions, the ones that had screamed and fought and blawed. One by one, they entered, not as ghosts, not as intruders, but as guests coming home. Emma stood. She didn't speak. She just held out her hands, and they came. The room didn't swell. It didn't burst. It breathed. It received. Lanterns above glowed brighter, and outside, through the tall windows Emma hadn't noticed before, the sky stretched wide and clean. No distortion, no haze. Just stars, endless, gentle, watching without judgment. One by one, her past selves sat. They laughed, they rested. And Emma, the only one still whole and present, walked the edge of the room once, touching each wall with her fingers, whispering a simple promise. I will not forget you, because this room, this last room, was not about survival. It was about belonging. And Emma finally did. She returned to the table. Her tea was still warm. Across from her, her future self, still waiting, smiled and stood. And before fading completely, she said one last thing. You built the door. Now build the world. And then she was gone. Not vanished. Just no longer needed. Emma sat back, looked around at the room full of every version of herself she had ever buried, and felt no fear. She reached into her pocket. The match was still there. She struck it, not to burn the house, but to light a single lantern, her own. The flame flickered once, then held, steady, alive. Home.